This black doctor was told to give up her first-class seat. 30 minutes later, everyone on the plane was left speechless. Well, isn't that special? First class must be lowering their standards. That single venomous sentence, whispered just loud enough to be heard, ignited a firestorm at 30,000 feet. What started as a spoiled mother's demand for a black doctor's seat spiraled into a jaw-dropping airport drama. But the real shock wasn't the woman's entitlement. It was the pilot's ice-cold response that brought the entire plane to a standstill. Stay tuned to witness how one woman's prejudice led to an unforgettable public takedown and a wave of karma so devastating it would cost her family everything. Just 15 minutes after Veronica's racist remark, the entire trajectory of multiple lives would change forever. You won't believe how this story ends. The air in the first-class lounge at JFK Terminal 4 hummed with a specific kind of quiet energy. The soft clinking of glasses, the muted taps of fingers on keyboards, the rustle of expensive newspapers. It was a curated tranquility, a bubble designed to insulate its inhabitants from the chaotic symphony of the main concourse. Have you ever been in a situation where you immediately felt like someone didn't think you belonged? Drop a comment below about your experience. Dr. Jasmine Powell breathed it in a small, grateful smile gracing her lips. For the next 8 hours, this was her world. Not Dr. Powell, the surgical resident who had just completed a grueling 36-hour shift. Not Jasmine, the daughter of a postal worker and an elementary school teacher from Baltimore. Here she was, simply passenger Powell seat 3B on her way to the International Medical Innovation Conference in London, an all-expenses-paid trip she had earned by pioneering a revolutionary new technique in minimally invasive cardiac surgery. Her thesis had been accepted for the keynote presentation, a life-changing opportunity. The first-class ticket, a surprise upgrade from the conference organizers, felt like the universe finally acknowledging her years of sacrifice. She was dressed in comfortable but chic travel attire, black tailored trousers, a silk shell top, and a cream-colored cashmere cardigan. Her locks were elegantly twisted into an intricate updo, and a pair of simple diamond studs, a gift from her parents upon her medical school graduation, were her only jewelry. Jasmine sat in a plush leather armchair reviewing her presentation notes on a tablet, her focus absolute. The complex diagrams of cardiac procedures flashed across her screen as she mentally rehearsed the precision of each incision, each suture. This was her moment, her chance to change how cardiac surgery was performed worldwide. In her mind, she could still hear her father's voice from all those years ago. Baby girl, they might not always want to give you a seat at the table, but when you earn it, don't you dare let anyone take it from you. Her father had worked through rain, sleet, and snow for 30 years to put food on their table and send her to medical school. Her mother had graded papers late into the night while working 2 jobs. They had sacrificed everything for her to be sitting in this lounge today. A flash of memory, 12-year-old Jasmine staying up until midnight to study anatomy books her science teacher had loaned her. 16-year-old Jasmine volunteering at the local hospital while her friends went to parties. 22-year-old Jasmine being told by a professor that people like her might be better suited to nursing than surgery. 28-year-old Jasmine performing her first solo cardiac procedure with hands that didn't shake despite the weight of expectations. Now, at 32, she was about to present research that could save thousands of lives. Her technique reduced recovery time from open-heart surgery by 60% and decreased complication rates dramatically. Patients who might have died on the table now had a fighting chance. She took a sip of sparkling water, enjoying this moment of peace before the intensity of the conference. Tomorrow, she would stand before the world's leading cardiac surgeons and change the conversation about what was possible. The exhaustion of her recent shift still pulled at her, but adrenaline and excitement kept her alert. She had trained for this moment her entire career. Nothing would throw her off balance now. The bubble popped with the arrival of a woman who didn't so much enter the lounge as she did conquer it. She was a tornado of Chanel blonde highlights and sharp assessing glances. In her late 40s, her face was a testament to expensive maintenance pulled taut and smooth where nature would have allowed softness. Trailing a half step behind her was a teenage girl, likely her daughter, who was absorbed in her phone, a curtain of matching blonde hair hiding her expression. The woman who would later be known as Veronica Daniels scanned the room like a hawk searching for prey. Her eyes swept over the businessmen in their suits and the older couple sipping champagne before finally landing on Jasmine. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps disbelief, crossed her features. She steered her daughter Madison toward the seating area directly opposite Jasmine. Madison put that dreadful thing away. Veronica snapped, her voice carrying across the quiet space. "You'll rot your brain before we even get to London." Madison mumbled something without looking up. Veronica sighed dramatically and began arranging their carry-on luggage, a Louis Vuitton duffel and a matching tote, as if she were arranging pieces on a chessboard. She kept stealing glances at Jasmine, her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. A diamond tennis bracelet glinted on Veronica's wrist as she pulled out a leather planner embossed with her initials. Designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Everything about her screamed old money and older entitlement. Jasmine, feeling the weight of the woman's gaze, tried to ignore it, focusing on a complex diagram of aortic valve replacement. Years of working in predominantly white, male-dominated operating rooms had given her a thick skin. She'd learned when to speak up and when to let microaggressions roll off her back. Right now, all she wanted was peace and preparation. The ambient noise of the lounge continued around them, ice clinking in glasses, the soft murmur of business deals being made, the occasional announcement over the PA system. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, planes taxied across the tarmac, silver birds against the blue afternoon sky. Madison finally lowered her phone and whispered something to her mother. Veronica's response was sharp and immediate. "Of course we're in first class. Your father would never have us fly any other way. It's about standards, Madison." Jasmine kept her eyes on her tablet, but her focus had been broken. She could feel Veronica's disapproval radiating across the space between them, an invisible wall of judgment that had nothing to do with Jasmine personally and everything to do with what she represented, a disruption to Veronica's worldview. The initial boarding call for Flight 237 to Heathrow was announced, cutting through the murmur of the lounge. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now beginning pre-boarding for British Airways Flight 237 to London Heathrow. At this time, we invite our first-class passengers and those requiring special assistance to proceed to the gate." Jasmine began to gather her things, slipping her tablet into its case and picking up her small carry-on. As she stood, she noticed Veronica doing the same, directing Madison to collect their belongings with sharp, efficient gestures. As Jasmine made her way toward the exit, she found her path suddenly blocked. Veronica had positioned herself and Madison directly in front of her, creating a human barricade of expensive perfume and privilege. "Excuse me," Jasmine said politely, her voice calm and even. Veronica looked down her nose, her eyes performing a slow, insulting appraisal of Jasmine's attire. "They're boarding Group 1 now," she said, as if instructing a lost child. "That's for first-class passengers." Jasmine held up her boarding pass, the bold Group 1 and Seat 3B clearly visible. "Yes, I know. That's me." A perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched on Veronica's forehead. She let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, of course. My mistake." The apology was laced with so much sarcasm it was practically dripping. She turned to Madison, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was intentionally audible. "Well, isn't that special? First class must be lowering their standards." The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The businessman to Jasmine's left lowered his newspaper slightly, his eyes meeting hers with a flash of sympathy. A couple nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jasmine's spine stiffened. Years of navigating predominantly white male-dominated spaces in medicine had given her a thick skin, but the casual public nature of the insult still stung. The implication was clear. People like her didn't belong here. She refused to give the woman the satisfaction of a reaction. She offered a tight professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Have a pleasant flight," she said, her tone impeccably neutral before stepping around the woman and walking towards the jet bridge. She could feel Veronica's glare burning into her back. The woman was used to a world that bent to her will, a world where her wealth and her whiteness were an all-access pass. Jasmine, by simply existing in this space, had somehow violated the natural order of Veronica's universe. As Jasmine handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, she heard Veronica behind her voice pitch to Carrie, "The service really isn't what it used to be. I remember when travel had standards." The gate agent, a young Hispanic woman named Maria, checked Jasmine's boarding pass and gave her a warm smile. "Enjoy your flight, Dr. Powell." The emphasis on her title was subtle but deliberate, a small act of solidarity that Jasmine appreciated more than Maria would ever know. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, Jasmine took a deep breath. Focus on what matters, she told herself. In 24 hours, she would be standing on stage changing the future of cardiac surgery. This woman was a momentary irritation, nothing more. But as she walked down the carpeted path toward the aircraft, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. Something in Veronica's entitled demeanor suggested a woman used to getting her way no matter what or who stood in her path. As Jasmine stepped onto the plane and was greeted by the flight attendant, she took a deep breath, determined to let it go. She had a career-defining presentation to deliver. She wouldn't let some miserable, prejudiced woman derail her focus. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Powell," the flight attendant, Laura Mendez said with a genuine smile. "You're in seat 3B, just down the aisle on your right." Jasmine thanked her and made her way into the first-class cabin. It was more spacious and luxurious than she had anticipated. The pods were arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, providing both window and aisle access for every passenger. Each seat was a spacious pod with a lie-flat bed, a large entertainment screen, and a small side table. The soft lighting and muted color scheme created an atmosphere of sophisticated comfort. She found her seat 3B and settled in, slipping off her shoes and placing her tablet on the side table. A welcome glass of champagne was already waiting, along with a hot towel and an amenity kit in a sleek leather pouch. This was more luxury than she had ever experienced. For a moment, she allowed herself to savor it, to accept that she had earned this moment of comfort after years of overnight shifts and 18-hour surgeries. She was finally starting to relax when a familiar, sharp voice shattered her peace. "You have got to be kidding me." Jasmine looked up. Veronica Daniels was standing in the aisle, her face a mask of theatrical disbelief. Next to her, Madison looked mortified, trying to shrink into herself. Veronica's boarding pass was in her hand. She was pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the seats across from Jasmine. "Seats 3D and 3F, she announced to Laura, who was helping another passenger. "These can't be our seats." Laura, a consummate professional with a patient smile, came over. "May I see your boarding passes, ma'am?" Veronica thrust them forward. "We are in 3D and 3F, but this person," she said, gesturing vaguely towards Jasmine, "is in 3B. My daughter was supposed to have the window seat." "3F is a window seat, ma'am," Laura said, pointing. "As is 3A on the other side. This is a 1-2-1 seating configuration." "That's not the point," Veronica hissed, her voice rising. "The point is, I booked these tickets months ago. We were supposed to sit together. I need that seat." She wasn't looking at the flight attendant anymore. Her cold, demanding eyes were locked directly on Jasmine. "You'll have to move." The request, no. The demand hung in the confined space of the first-class cabin. It wasn't a question. It was a royal decree. Jasmine stared at Veronica Daniels, processing the sheer audacity. It was one thing to make a racist jibe in the lounge. It was another to try and publicly displace her from a seat she had every right to occupy. The other first-class passengers were beginning to notice their quiet conversations faltering as they turned to watch the unfolding drama. "I'm sorry," Jasmine said, her voice dangerously calm. "But this is my assigned seat. My boarding pass says 3B. And my daughter Veronica shot back, gesturing to Madison, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole as a minor. She needs to be seated next to her mother. It's a security issue. Mom, I'm 16, Madison mumbled. Quiet, Madison. Veronica snapped without looking at her. She turned her attention back to the flight attendant. Surely there's something you can do. We paid full price for these tickets. The emphasis on full price was unmistakable, an implication that Jasmine had somehow gotten her seat through less legitimate means. Laura looked uncomfortable but maintained her professional demeanor. I understand your concern, Mrs. Daniels, but all our first-class seats are the same price. Dr. Powell has been assigned seat 3B, and it appears you and your daughter have been assigned 3D and 3F. Those are your confirmed seats. This is unacceptable, Veronica said, her voice rising further. Several more passengers turned to look. I want to speak to whoever is in charge. I'm the lead flight attendant for the first-class cabin, Laura replied. I'd be happy to see if we can find 2 seats together, but I'm afraid I can't ask another passenger to move from their assigned seat without their agreement. Veronica's gaze swung back to Jasmine, expectant and demanding. Jasmine met her gaze steadily. I'm sorry, but I need this seat. I have work to prepare for a medical conference, and I specifically chose this seat for the privacy it offers. A flash of anger crossed Veronica's face, quickly replaced by a calculating look. Well, she said loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, I suppose some people just don't understand basic courtesy. Madison's face flushed with embarrassment. Mom, please. It's fine. We can just sit in our assigned seats. It is not fine, Veronica snapped. I paid for us to sit together, and that's what we're going to do. The standoff continued, with Veronica refusing to take her assigned seat and blocking the aisle, preventing other passengers from boarding. The atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense. Is your blood boiling yet? Hit that like button if you're already Team Jasmine in this situation. Have you ever had to deal with someone who felt entitled to something that was rightfully yours? Comment below. I don't think you understand, Veronica said, leaning closer to Jasmine. Her voice lowered, but still carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. My husband is Richard Daniels of Daniels Construction. Perhaps you've heard of him. He's one of the largest donors to several major hospitals in the Northeast. The name drop hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. It was meant to intimidate, to establish a hierarchy where Veronica's connection to wealth and power trumped Jasmine's right to occupy space. Jasmine's expression remained impassive, but internally she was calculating the cost of this confrontation. She needed to rest before her presentation. She needed to review her notes one final time. Every minute spent in this pointless power struggle was a minute taken away from her preparation. But there was a principle at stake. A line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. Mrs. Daniels, Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. I understand you'd prefer to sit with your daughter, but this is my assigned seat and I need it for my work. Perhaps the flight attendant can help find another solution that doesn't involve displacing me. Veronica's nostrils flared. She clearly wasn't used to having her demands refused. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is? I'm sure your husband is very important, Jasmine replied evenly. As is my work. I'm presenting groundbreaking cardiac surgery techniques at the International Medical Innovation Conference tomorrow. Techniques that save lives. So while I understand your preference, I'm afraid I can't accommodate it. Your money buys a seat, Mrs. Daniels, but it doesn't buy you the right to devalue others. Jasmine added her words, precise and powerful. The cabin fell silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. For 10 full seconds, 200 people held their breath, witnessing dignity refuse to be diminished. A few seats away, an older gentleman in seat 1D looked up with interest. Medical Innovation Conference. Are you with the Harrison panel? No, sir, Jasmine replied. I'm presenting on minimally invasive bypass alternatives. The man nodded appreciatively. Fascinating field. Desperately needed innovations there. Veronica, momentarily sidelined by this exchange, seemed to inflate with indignation. Excuse me, we're in the middle of resolving a seating issue here. There is no issue to resolve, ma'am, Laura interjected gently but firmly. These are the seats assigned by the airline. If you'd like, I can check if any other first-class passengers might voluntarily switch, but I cannot force Dr. Powell to give up her assigned seat. This is ridiculous, Veronica said, her voice rising again. I've never been treated this way in my life. A murmur ran through the cabin. The businessman in 2A, Michael Turner, had begun discreetly recording the encounter on his phone. A retired teacher in 2F, Clara Johnson, was watching the scene unfold with a frown of disapproval directed squarely at Veronica. Madison tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mom, please. You're making a scene. Let's just sit down. No, Madison. This is about principle, about getting what we paid for. We paid for seats 3D and 3F. Madison pointed out, her voice barely above a whisper. That's what our boarding passes say. Veronica shot her daughter a look that could freeze fire. Whose side are you on? The question hung in the air as Madison shrunk back, her face flushing with embarrassment. I just want to sit down, she mumbled. Mrs. Daniels. Laura tried again. The flight is fully booked in first class. These are your assigned seats. I need to ask you to take them so we can continue boarding. Veronica stood her ground, physically blocking the aisle. I want to speak to the captain. Laura's professional smile flickered briefly. The captain is preparing for departure. I'm sure he doesn't want to be disturbed for a seating assignment issue. Well, he's about to be disturbed, Veronica replied, crossing her arms, because I'm not moving until I get what I want. If you've ever witnessed someone making a scene in public over something trivial, give this video a thumbs up right now. The drama is just heating up and you won't believe what happens next. Laura Mendez had been a flight attendant for 15 years. She had handled drunken passengers, medical emergencies, and security threats with unflappable grace. But entitled passengers like Veronica Daniels tested her patience like nothing else. Mrs. Daniels, she said, her voice gentle but with an undertone of steel. I understand you're upset, but I need to remind you that interfering with a flight crew's duties is a federal offense. We need to continue boarding, and you're currently preventing that. Veronica's eyes widened with indignation. Are you threatening me? Not at all. I'm simply stating airline policy and federal law. Now, would you like to take your assigned seats, or would you prefer to discuss this further with airport security? The mention of security caused a visible reaction from Veronica. Her eyes darted around the cabin, assessing how the confrontation was being perceived. She noticed Michael still recording discreetly and several other passengers watching with expressions ranging from annoyance to outright disapproval. Fine, she said, her voice tight. But I want it noted that I'm extremely dissatisfied with the service today, and I want the captain to be informed of this situation immediately. I'll certainly make a note of your concerns, Laura replied neutrally. Now, if you and your daughter would please take your seats, we can continue boarding. With a final glare at Jasmine, Veronica moved to her assigned seat 3D, while Madison slipped into 3F by the window. The aisle finally clear, the remaining passengers began to board. Jasmine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She tried to return to her presentation notes, but her concentration was shattered. She could feel Veronica's hostile gaze from across the aisle burning into her like a laser. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. I'm sorry about my mom. Jasmine looked up to see Madison leaning slightly across the aisle, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the cabin. It's not your fault, Jasmine replied kindly. She gets like this sometimes, Madison continued, her eyes darting to make sure her mother wasn't listening. Veronica had put on noise-canceling headphones and was ostentatiously flipping through a luxury travel magazine. She thinks the whole world should rearrange itself to suit her. The honesty in the girl's voice was startling. Jasmine offered a small smile. We all have our moments. Not like her, Madison said with the weary wisdom of a teenager who had witnessed too many such scenes. I'm really sorry. Before Jasmine could respond, a commotion near the front of the cabin drew everyone's attention. A flight attendant was making an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we're experiencing a slight delay in our departure. We ask for your patience and will update you as soon as we have more information. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the cabin. Delays were never welcome news, especially on a transatlantic flight. Laura approached their row with a tight smile. Mrs. Daniels, the captain, would like to speak with you. Veronica removed her headphones with a triumphant expression. Of course he would. I'm sure he wants to apologize personally for this seating debacle. Actually, Laura replied, her professional mask firmly in place. He'd like to discuss the disruption during boarding. The triumph on Veronica's face faltered. What disruption? I was simply advocating for the seats I paid for. The captain will explain, Laura said. If you'll please come with me. As Veronica stood to follow Laura to the front of the cabin, she shot Jasmine a venomous glare. This isn't over, she hissed. Jasmine watched her go with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had hoped the confrontation was resolved, but Veronica's parting words suggested otherwise. The older gentleman in seat 1D caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. Clara Johnson from 2F leaned over and whispered, Don't let her bully you, dear. Some people think their money buys them the right to treat others however they please. Jasmine nodded gratefully. It was a small comfort to know that not everyone in the cabin shared Veronica's attitude. Michael Turner, still holding his phone, discreetly leaned toward Jasmine. I got most of that on video, he said quietly, just in case it's needed later. Thank you, Jasmine replied, surprised by the gesture. Though I hope it won't come to that. People like her rarely back down, Michael observed. Best to have evidence. His words proved prophetic when moments later, Veronica's voice carried from the front of the cabin, loud and indignant. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who my husband is? After several minutes of heated discussion at the front of the cabin, Laura escorted Veronica back to her seat. The older woman's face was flushed with anger, her movements stiff with barely contained rage. As she passed Jasmine's seat, she paused, a calculated smile replacing her scowl. Dr. Powell, was it? She said, her voice honeyed, but with a bitter undertone. I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. Jasmine looked up cautiously. Mrs. Daniels, I understand you're on your way to an important conference. How admirable. Medicine is such a worthy profession. The pause before worthy spoke volumes. I imagine you've worked very hard to get where you are. Yes, I have, Jasmine replied, simply unsure where this was going. Veronica reached into her purse and discreetly pulled out a small stack of bills. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that benefits us both. Here's $500. That should be enough for you to comfortably enjoy economy class, and it would allow my daughter and me to sit together as we planned. She held the money out in a way that was just visible to Jasmine but concealed from most of the other passengers. It was a carefully staged moment of corruption, designed to be both tempting and demeaning. Jasmine stared at the outstretched hand and the money it contained. In that moment, she saw beyond Veronica Daniels to every person who had ever tried to put a price tag on her dignity, every system that had attempted to define her worth based on her skin color rather than her capabilities. My seat isn't for sale, Jasmine said quietly but firmly, and neither is my dignity. Veronica's face hardened. Don't be difficult. Everyone has a price. What's yours, 1,002? There isn't enough money on this plane to buy my self-respect, Mrs. Daniels. Dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right. The calculated smile vanished, replaced by naked contempt. You're making a mistake. No, you are, Jasmine replied, her voice level. And it's one that says far more about you than it does about me. Veronica's hand tightened around the money before she shoved it back into her purse. As she did so, her elbow accidentally knocked over Jasmine's glass of water, sending it cascading onto the tablet containing her presentation notes. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Veronica exclaimed with exaggerated concern that didn't reach her eyes. Jasmine quickly grabbed her tablet, wiping it with the available napkins. Thankfully, the device was water-resistant, but the intent behind the action was clear. "Is there a problem here?" Laura had returned, alerted by the commotion. "Just a little accident," Veronica said with faux innocence. "These seats are so cramped it's easy to knock things over." "Dr. Powell, are you all right?" "Do you need anything?" Laura asked, her eyes registering the deliberate nature of the accident. "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine replied, continuing to dry her tablet. "Fortunately, no damage was done. She tried to bribe me to give up my seat," Jasmine added quietly for Laura's ears only. $500. Laura's eyes widened slightly before her professional mask slipped back into place. "I see. Mrs. Daniels, I need to remind you that attempting to bribe other passengers or interfering with their belongings is against airline policy." "Bribe? What an outrageous accusation," Veronica protested. "I was simply offering compensation for inconvenience. And as for the water, it was clearly an accident." Clara Johnson, who had been watching the exchange from her seat in 2F, spoke up. "It didn't look like an accident to me. It looked quite deliberate, actually." "No one asked for your opinion," Veronica snapped. "Well, I'm giving it anyway," Clara replied calmly. "What you're doing is disgraceful." Other passengers began to voice their agreement. Michael was still recording, discreetly capturing the escalating tension. Veronica looked around, suddenly aware that public opinion in the cabin had turned decidedly against her. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, returning to her seat. "Richard will hear about this." Madison, who had witnessed the entire exchange with growing horror, looked at Jasmine with an expression of profound embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she mouthed silently. Laura lowered her voice as she helped Jasmine clean up the spilled water. "The captain has been informed of the situation. He's considering whether further action is necessary." "I don't want to cause any more delays," Jasmine said. "I just want to get to London in time for my presentation." "I understand," Laura replied. "But this behavior can't be tolerated, especially in first class. The captain takes these incidents very seriously." As if on cue, the cabin intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I apologize for the delay in our departure. We are currently addressing a situation on board. I ask for your continued patience, and we hope to be underway shortly." The message was deliberately vague, but everyone in first class knew exactly what situation was being addressed. All eyes turned toward Veronica, who sat rigid in her seat, staring straight ahead as if she could will herself invisible. If you've ever been in a situation where someone tried to bribe or bully you, tag a friend who needs to see this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life drama with powerful messages. The appearance of Captain Thomas Reynolds in the first-class cabin created an immediate shift in the atmosphere. At 58, with silver temples and the ramrod-straight posture of his military background, he carried an air of unquestionable authority. His uniform was immaculate, his expression serious but not severe. As he strode purposefully down the aisle, a hush fell over the cabin. This wasn't the usual captain's greeting or casual cabin visit. This was intervention, and everyone knew it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice carrying easily throughout the cabin. "I apologize for the delay. I've been informed of a situation that requires my personal attention." His gaze swept over the cabin, taking in Jasmine's composed demeanor, Veronica's defiant posture, Madison's evident embarrassment, and the mixture of irritation and curiosity on the faces of the other passengers. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, addressing Veronica directly, "I understand there's been an issue regarding seating arrangements." Veronica straightened, seeing an opportunity to plead her case to a higher authority. "Yes, Captain, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. My daughter and I were supposed to be seated together, but instead we've been separated by seating arrangements." She gestured vaguely toward Jasmine. Captain Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And your boarding passes indicate your assigned seats are 3D and 3F, Laura supplied. "And you are currently sitting in 3D and 3F, Laura confirmed. The issue arose when Mrs. Daniels demanded that Dr. Powell give up her correctly assigned seat 3B. The captain turned to Jasmine. "Dr. Powell, I understand you're on your way to a medical conference." "Yes, sir. The International Medical Innovation Conference in London. I'm presenting tomorrow. And your boarding pass was issued for seat 3B. "Yes, sir." Jasmine handed him her boarding pass for confirmation. Captain Reynolds examined it and nodded. "Everything appears to be in order here." He turned back to Veronica. "Mrs. Daniels, I'm afraid I don't see the issue. You and your daughter have been assigned seats 3D and 3F, and those are the seats you're sitting in. The issue," Veronica said, her voice rising again, "is that my daughter and I need to sit together without someone between us." "Surely you can understand that I understand your preference," Captain Reynolds replied evenly. "However, airlines assign seats based on availability and booking time. If you wanted specific seats together without anyone between you, the time to address that was during booking or check-in, not during boarding. I was told when I booked that we would have seats together. Together can mean many things, Mrs. Daniels. You and your daughter are indeed seated in the same cabin, in the same row, with just the aisle between you. Many would consider that to be together." Several passengers nodded in agreement. Veronica, sensing her argument weakening, changed tactics. "My husband is Richard Daniels of Daniels Construction," she said, dropping the name like a trump card. "He's a major client of your airline. I'm sure he would be very disappointed to hear that his wife and daughter were treated so poorly." Captain Reynolds' expression didn't change. "Mrs. Daniels, on my aircraft, every passenger receives the same level of respect and service regardless of who they are or who they're connected to. Your husband's business relationship with the airline doesn't entitle you to displace another passenger from their assigned seat." A murmur of approval rippled through the cabin. Michael's phone continued to record discreetly. Furthermore, Captain Reynolds continued, his voice taking on a steelier edge. "I've been informed of several concerning incidents. Your refusal to take your assigned seat delaying boarding for other passengers, your attempt to bribe Dr. Powell to give up her seat, and what appears to have been a deliberate spilling of water on her electronic device." Veronica's face paled slightly. "That's a complete mischaracterization." "Is it?" The captain gestured toward Michael. "Because I've been shown video evidence that suggests otherwise." Michael lowered his phone, looking slightly embarrassed but resolute. "I thought someone should document what was happening." "Thank you, sir," Captain Reynolds said with a nod. "Witness documentation can be very helpful in situations like these." He turned back to Veronica. "Mrs. Daniels, this type of behavior is not acceptable on any flight, but particularly not on an international flight where comfort and harmony among passengers is essential for everyone's well-being." Veronica's expression hardened. "So you're taking her side because she's a doctor, or is there another reason?" The insinuation in her tone was unmistakable, a thinly veiled reference to Jasmine's race. A collective intake of breath echoed through the cabin. Captain Reynolds' eyes narrowed slightly, the only visible sign that the implication had registered. "I'm not taking sides, Mrs. Daniels. I'm upholding airline policy and federal aviation regulations which apply equally to all passengers, regardless of their profession status or any other characteristic." His emphasis on the last words made it clear he understood exactly what Veronica had been implying. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and powerful, addressing the entire cabin, but keeping his gaze fixed on Veronica. "On my aircraft, every passenger's dignity is non-negotiable. This isn't merely company policy, it's about basic human decency." The silence was so complete you could hear a pin drop. 237 passengers held their breath as they witnessed something rare in today's world: consequences for entitlement. "Mrs. Daniels, your behavior today has violated both that principle and several airline policies. You've disrupted boarding, attempted to bribe another passenger, intentionally damaged property, and now you've made comments that could be construed as discriminatory." Veronica's face flushed with indignation. "That's absurd. I've done nothing wrong." "Several witnesses and video evidence suggest otherwise." Captain Reynolds replied calmly. "Now I have a decision to make. Under federal regulations, I have the authority to remove any passenger I consider a potential disruption to the safety or comfort of the flight." The implication hung in the air. Veronica's expression shifted from indignation to alarm. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice losing some of its previous bravado. "You can't remove me from this flight. Do you have any idea what that would do to my schedule? I have important engagements in London. I'm sure Dr. Powell also has important engagements," the captain observed. "That didn't seem to concern you when you were attempting to displace her." Michael and Clara exchanged approving glances. Several other passengers nodded in agreement. A few quietly reached for their phones, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. "I'm giving you 3 options, Mrs. Daniels." Captain Reynolds continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Option 1. You can offer a sincere apology to Dr. Powell and to the other passengers for the delay you've caused, return to your assigned seat, and behave appropriately for the duration of the flight." He held up a second finger. "Option 2. You can voluntarily deplane and take the next available economy flight to London, as first class is fully booked for the remainder of today's flights." A third finger joined the others. "Option 3. You can continue this disruptive behavior, in which case I will have no choice but to have you escorted off the aircraft by airport security and placed on our no-fly list pending a full investigation." He lowered his hand. "The choice is yours, but I need your decision now. We have a flight to operate and 237 other passengers waiting to depart." The cabin held its collective breath, the tension almost palpable. Everyone was watching Veronica, waiting for her response. Madison looked mortified, sinking deeper into her seat as if trying to disappear. Veronica stared at the captain, speechless for perhaps the first time since boarding. The ultimatum was clear, the options laid bare with military precision. Her face cycled through emotions: shock, disbelief, indignation, and finally, the dawning realization that she had miscalculated severely. Madison leaned across the aisle. "Mom," she whispered urgently, "just apologize. Please." Veronica's jaw tightened. Pride warred with practicality on her face. Finally, practicality won barely. "Fine," she said tightly. "I apologize if anyone was offended by my actions." Captain Reynolds shook his head firmly. "That's not a sincere apology, Mrs. Daniels. If anyone was offended, places the responsibility on others for their reactions, not on you for your actions." Actually, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I don't believe you're genuinely remorseful. Your behavior throughout this incident has demonstrated a consistent pattern of entitlement and disrespect." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, sensing that this was no ordinary captain's intervention. "Given what I've witnessed and the evidence presented to me, I'm invoking option 3. Mrs. Daniels, you'll be deplaning immediately." Veronica's face went from flushed to ashen in an instant. "You can't do this. Do you have any idea who my husband is?" "Your husband's name carries no weight on my aircraft, Mrs. Daniels. Here I am, the final authority, and I've made my decision based on your behavior, not your connections." He gestured to Laura. "Please notify security that we need assistance removing a disruptive passenger." Laura nodded and moved swiftly toward the front of the cabin. Veronica stood her hands shaking with rage. "This is outrageous. I'll have your job for this." "My husband will." "Your husband is welcome to file a complaint through the proper channels," Captain Reynolds interrupted calmly. "But right now you need to gather your belongings and prepare to deplane." Several passengers had begun to clap softly, the sound gradually swelling as others joined in. It wasn't mocking or celebratory. It was supportive and acknowledgement of justice being served. "What about my daughter?" Veronica demanded, gesturing to Madison. "As a minor, she would normally deplane with you," Captain Reynolds replied. "However, given her age and the circumstances, if she feels comfortable traveling alone, she may do so. The choice is hers." All eyes turned to Madison, who looked torn between embarrassment at her mother's behavior and relief at the possibility of escaping the situation. I'd like to continue to London," she said quietly. "Dad's expecting me." "Very well," the captain nodded. "Mrs. Daniels, if you'll come with me now." As Veronica was escorted from the cabin, her face contorted in rage, then shock, then the unfamiliar sting of accountability, an expression that would soon become a viral sensation across social media. The other passengers watched in stunned silence. It was a rare moment where someone who clearly expected their wealth and status to shield them from consequences was being held accountable. Captain Reynolds paused beside Jasmine's seat. "Dr. Powell, I apologize for what you've experienced today. Please let our cabin crew know if you need anything at all during the flight." "Thank you," Captain Jasmine replied quietly. "No," he said with a small smile. "Thank you for standing your ground with dignity. That's something I've always respected." He addressed the cabin once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. And remember, on this aircraft, everyone deserves to be treated with respect. No exceptions." As he returned to the cockpit, spontaneous applause broke out across the cabin. Passengers nodded approvingly, some raising their glasses in salute. It was a moment of collective affirmation that some principles transcended status, wealth, or privilege. Dignity was non-negotiable. And today, that wasn't just an empty phrase, it was a promise kept. Can you believe the captain's decision? If you're applauding his actions just like the passengers on that flight, smash that like button right now. This story is just getting started, and the karma that awaits Veronica Daniels is more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The relative calm that settled over the first-class cabin after Captain Reynolds' declaration lasted approximately 30 seconds. Then, like a volcano that had only been dormant, not extinguished, Veronica erupted. "This is outrageous!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made passengers wince. "You cannot do this to me. I am Veronica Daniels." 2 airport security officers had already boarded the plane, their expressions professionally neutral despite the scene unfolding before them. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," the taller officer said calmly. "Please gather your belongings. I will not be treated like a criminal." Veronica's face had gone from ashen to crimson, veins visibly pulsing at her temples. "Do you have any idea who my husband is?" The cabin had gone deathly quiet. Every eye was fixed on the spectacle, many passengers recording discreetly on their phones. What had begun as an entitled woman's demand for a seat was transforming into an epic public meltdown that would soon be viral fodder across social media platforms. "Ma'am," the second officer said, his tone firm, but not unkind. "You can either walk off this aircraft with dignity, or we can escort you off. Those are your options at this point." Veronica whirled toward Jasmine, pointing a trembling finger. "This is your fault. You planned this, somehow." Jasmine remained perfectly still, her expression calm. "Mrs. Daniels, I just wanted to sit in my assigned seat. Don't you dare speak to me. You've ruined everything." Veronica's voice cracked with emotion. Rage. Yes, but also the dawning humiliation of realizing that dozens of strangers were witnessing her unraveling. Madison had sunk so low in her seat she was practically horizontal, her face buried in her hands. "Mom, please," she whispered. "Just go." Something in her daughter's mortified plea seemed to penetrate Veronica's fury. She straightened, attempting to gather the tattered remnants of her dignity. "Fine," she said, her voice still shaking. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." She yanked her designer carry-on from the overhead compartment with such force that it nearly hit another passenger. The man dodged, throwing her a disgusted look. Turning to Madison, Veronica lowered her voice to a hiss. "Call your father the second you land. Tell him everything." Madison nodded miserably, unable to meet her mother's gaze. As Veronica moved toward the exit, escorted by the security officers, the whispers began. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few even laughed softly, the nervous release of tension that had built during the confrontation. Just before reaching the door, Veronica paused, turning back to face the cabin. Her expression had transformed from rage to something colder, more calculating. "Remember my face," she announced to the cabin at large, "because I promise you'll be seeing it again. When my husband hears about this, heads will roll." The security officer gently but firmly guided her forward. "Ma'am, let's go." The moment Veronica disappeared through the exit, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the cabin. Soft applause broke out, quickly spreading, until nearly everyone was clapping, not in mockery but in relief and approval of justice served. Laura approached Madison, who remained slumped in her seat. "Are you okay, Miss Daniels? Would you like to be reseated?" Madison nodded gratefully. "Could I maybe move further back? Away from—" She gestured vaguely toward the front of the cabin, clearly wanting distance from the scene of her mother's humiliation. "Of course. We have a free seat in row 5 if that would make you more comfortable." As Madison gathered her things, she paused beside Jasmine's seat. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her eyes swimming with tears. "She's always been like this, but never this bad." "It's not your fault," Jasmine assured her gently, "and I'm sorry you had to witness that." Madison nodded, blinking back tears before following Laura to her new seat. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize again for the delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate shortly. Flight attendants prepare for departure." As Jasmine settled into her flight to London, she had no idea that her path would cross with the Daniels family again, this time with much higher stakes. What began as a simple dispute over airplane seating was about to escalate into a confrontation that would change multiple lives forever. Who else is glad that Veronica got what she deserved? If you're cheering for karma right now, hit that subscribe button, and if you're wondering what happens when Veronica's powerful husband gets involved, just wait until you see the next part of this incredible true story. The transatlantic crossing settled into a peaceful rhythm after the dramatic departure. The first-class cabin was notably calmer without Veronica's disruptive presence. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the space, serving a gourmet dinner accompanied by fine wines. The soft chime of silverware against china and the murmur of quiet conversations created a soothing backdrop. Jasmine had managed to return her focus to her presentation, making small adjustments to her slides and reviewing her speaking notes. Her tablet had survived the water incident unscathed, much to her relief. Madison, now seated in row 5, had been quiet for some time, alternating between watching a movie on her screen and staring thoughtfully out the window at the vast darkness below. About halfway through the flight, Madison approached Jasmine's seat, hesitant and clearly nervous. "Dr. Powell, could I talk to you for a minute?" Jasmine looked up from her tablet. "Of course." Madison slid into the empty seat beside Jasmine. "I wanted to apologize again for my mom. What she did was horrible." "You don't need to keep apologizing for her actions," Jasmine said gently. You're not responsible for her behavior. I know, but... Madison twisted her hands in her lap. I feel like somebody should acknowledge how wrong it was. The things she said, the way she acted, it was all about you being black, even if she didn't say it directly. The directness of the teenager's acknowledgement was both surprising and refreshing. Most people would have danced around the racial component, pretending not to see it. That took courage to say, Jasmine observed. Thank you. It's not courage. It's just... I see it all the time. The way she treats people she considers beneath her, especially people of color. Madison's voice dropped to a whisper. My parents think I don't notice, but I do. I always have. That must be difficult to witness, Jasmine said. It's embarrassing. And wrong. Madison looked up, meeting Jasmine's eyes directly. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you do it? Stay so calm when someone's being horrible to you. The question caught Jasmine off guard with its directness. She considered her answer carefully. It's taken years of practice, she admitted. In medical school and residency, I encountered plenty of people who didn't think I belonged. Patients who requested a different doctor when they saw me. Colleagues who attributed my success to affirmative action rather than ability. That's awful, Madison said, her eyes wide. It is. But I realized something important early on. If I reacted with anger every time someone underestimated or disrespected me, I'd spend all my energy on them instead of on my work. And my work is what matters. So you just ignore it. Not exactly. I acknowledge it, process it privately, and then decide if it's worth addressing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply continuing to excel in spite of people's expectations. Like today, you didn't yell back at my mom. No, because ultimately this flight wasn't about her or her prejudice. It was about me getting to London to present research that could help thousands of patients. Madison was quiet for a moment. I wish I could be more like that, she finally said. I usually just get embarrassed and freeze up when my mom acts that way. That's a completely natural response, Jasmine assured her. You're in a difficult position. My dad isn't much better, Madison confided. He's not as obvious about it as Mom, but he has the same attitudes. He just hides them better in public. Jasmine wasn't surprised. People like Veronica rarely existed in isolation. Their worldviews were often shared and reinforced by those closest to them. That must be challenging for you, especially if you're developing different values. Madison nodded, looking relieved to be understood. Sometimes I feel like I'm from a different planet than my parents. The things they care about, status, money, appearances, it all seems so empty. It's part of growing up forming your own worldview, Jasmine said. It takes courage to chart your own path, especially when it diverges from your family's. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Reynolds, who had emerged from the cockpit for his customary mid-flight check of the cabin. He stopped by their row. Everything comfortable here, ladies? He asked. Yes, thank you, Captain Jasmine replied. We've filed a formal incident report regarding today's events, he informed them quietly. The airline takes these matters very seriously. Mrs. Daniels will likely face consequences beyond just being removed from this flight. What kind of consequences? Madison asked, a note of worry in her voice despite everything. That will be determined by the airline's review board, but it could range from temporary suspension of flying privileges to being permanently banned from the airline. Madison looked stricken. Permanently banned. But my parents use this airline for everything. My dad's business depends on it. Actions have consequences, young lady. Your mother was warned multiple times and chose to continue behavior that disrupted an international flight and inconvenienced hundreds of passengers. I understand, Madison said quietly. After the captain moved on, Madison turned to Jasmine. My dad is going to be furious. He has this huge contract signing in London. That's why we were going there. What kind of business is your father? And Jasmine asked. Construction. Daniels Construction. They're about to sign a deal with some big medical technology company for a new research center. Jasmine's interest was piqued. A medical research center. Do you know which company? Meridian Medical Technologies? I think Dad's been talking about it for months. It's a $200 million contract. The name registered immediately. Meridian was one of the leading medical technology companies in the world, and they had expressed interest in implementing Jasmine's surgical technique in their new facilities. Meridian is actually going to be at the conference I'm presenting at, Jasmine said. Their CEO, Alexander Blackwood, is giving the keynote address. Madison's eyes widened. Really? That's who my dad is meeting with tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood. This coincidence created an unexpected connection between them. Jasmine wondered briefly if she would encounter Richard Daniels at the conference and what that interaction might be like, given what had transpired with his wife. Can I ask what your presentation is about? Madison asked, seeming genuinely interested. It's a new minimally invasive technique for cardiac surgery, Jasmine explained. It reduces recovery time by 60% and decreases complication rates, especially for high-risk patients who might not survive traditional open-heart procedures. That's amazing, Madison said, her eyes lighting up. You're literally saving lives. That's the goal, Jasmine smiled. It's what drives me through the long hours and sleepless nights. I've been thinking about medical school, Madison admitted. But my mom says it's too much work for too little reward. The question is, what do you think is helping people reward enough for you? Madison's thoughtful expression suggested she'd never been asked that question before. I think it might be, she said softly. I think it really might be. As they continued talking, Jasmine was struck by the contrast between Madison and her mother. Where Veronica saw the world through a lens of hierarchy and entitlement, Madison seemed to be developing a perspective based on empathy and fairness. It was a reminder that values weren't simply inherited, they were chosen often through conscious rejection of harmful examples. When Madison finally returned to her seat, Jasmine found herself hoping that this moment of connection might strengthen the girl's resolve to chart her own course regardless of her parents' expectations. The flight continued uneventfully after that, the aircraft making steady progress across the Atlantic. Jasmine managed to get a few hours of sleep in the comfortable lie-flat bed, preparing herself for the intensity of the conference ahead. If you've ever been inspired by someone who maintained their dignity in the face of prejudice, give this video a thumbs up, and stay tuned to see what happens when Jasmine and Richard Daniels finally meet face-to-face at the London conference. The arrivals hall at Heathrow Terminal 5 bustled with the controlled chaos typical of one of the world's busiest airports. Jasmine moved through immigration smoothly, her professional visa granting her expedited processing. As she waited for her checked bag, she checked her phone, relieved to find a message from the conference organizers confirming her presentation was still scheduled for the following morning. While waiting, she caught sight of Madison standing with a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, unmistakably Richard Daniels. Even from a distance, Jasmine could read the body language. Richard's posture was rigid with barely contained anger, as Madison spoke, likely recounting the events on the flight. His head snapped up suddenly, eyes scanning the baggage claim area until they locked onto Jasmine. She met his gaze calmly, refusing to look away. After a moment, he said something to Madison and began striding purposefully in Jasmine's direction. "Dr. Powell," he said, as he approached, his voice controlled but tight with suppressed emotion. "Richard Daniels, I believe you've had an interaction with my wife." "Mr. Daniels," Jasmine acknowledged with a professional nod, maintaining her composure. "I want to hear your version of what happened," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "My wife tells a very different story than my daughter." Jasmine considered her response carefully. "Mr. Daniels, I was simply sitting in my assigned seat. Your wife took exception to that and demanded I move. When I declined, she escalated the situation to the point where the captain had to intervene." and you had nothing to do with her removal from the flight. His skepticism was evident. I did not request her removal. That was the captain's decision after she continued to be disruptive despite multiple warnings. Richard's jaw tightened. Do you have any idea what inconvenience this has caused? My wife is stranded in New York. We have important social engagements here in London. I understand that's frustrating, Jasmine replied evenly. But the inconvenience was caused by your wife's choices, not mine. Madison, who had followed her father, looked uncomfortable but relieved that Jasmine wasn't backing down. You've made a powerful enemy today, Richard said, lowering his voice to an intimidating growl. I don't know if you're aware, but I have significant influence in medical circles. Daniels Construction builds hospitals, research facilities, medical schools. One word from me can open doors or close them. The threat was clear, but Jasmine refused to be intimidated. She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. Your money buys buildings, Mr. Daniels. But it doesn't buy you the right to devalue others. She said, her words precise and cutting. I don't make medical decisions based on threats. I make them based on what's best for my patients. I didn't come to London looking for enemies. I came to present research that could save lives. The airport around them seemed to fade away as the two stood in silent confrontation. For 10 full seconds, neither spoke the tension palpable between them. Dad, please, Madison interjected. Dr. Powell was really nice to me after Mom left. She didn't do anything wrong. Richard glanced at his daughter with an expression that silenced her immediately. Turning back to Jasmine, he said, You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Dr. Powell. My meeting with Meridian Medical Technologies this afternoon is too important to be derailed by this incident. Stay out of my way and perhaps we can both forget this unfortunate encounter. Before Jasmine could respond, a woman's voice called out from behind her. Dr. Powell. Jasmine Powell. She turned to see an elegant woman in her 50s approaching with a warm smile. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Foster from the conference committee. I've been sent to welcome you and escort you to your hotel. Dr. Foster. Thank you, Jasmine said, grateful for the interruption. It's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is mine. Your research has generated quite a buzz. Alexander Blackwood specifically mentioned wanting to attend your presentation. Dr. Foster noticed Richard standing there and her smile faltered slightly. Mr. Daniels, I didn't realize you knew Dr. Powell. Richard's demeanor shifted instantly, professional charm replacing his previous hostility. We've just met, actually. I was introducing myself since we'll both be at the Meridian meetings. Wonderful, Dr. Foster replied, though her tone suggested she found the coincidence anything but. Dr. Powell is our rising star at this year's conference. Her minimally invasive cardiac technique is revolutionary. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed this information. Is that so? Well, I'm sure it will be. Enlightening. Your luggage has arrived, Dr. Foster noted, pointing to Jasmine's bag on the carousel. Shall we? The car is waiting. Jasmine retrieved her suitcase. It was interesting meeting you, Mr. Daniels, she said with perfect professionalism. Madison, take care. As she walked away with Dr. Foster, she could feel Richard's gaze boring into her back. I see you've had the pleasure of meeting Richard Daniels, Doctor, Foster remarked once they were out of earshot. He's well connected in the medical construction world, though his reputation isn't entirely positive. So I gathered Jasmine replied diplomatically. His company is bidding to build Meridian's new research facility, a $200 million contract. He's been lobbying hard for it. His daughter mentioned something about that on the flight. Dr. Foster looked curious. You were on the same flight. I sense there's a story there. Jasmine sighed. A rather unpleasant one, I'm afraid. As they made their way to the waiting car, Jasmine gave Dr. Foster a condensed version of the events on the flight. The older woman listened with growing dismay. "That's appalling," she said when Jasmine finished, "though not entirely surprising given what I know of the Daniels family. They've built their empire on connections and intimidation as much as on concrete and steel." "He implied he could cause problems for my career," Jasmine admitted as they settled into the back of the luxury sedan. Dr. Foster's laugh was sharp. "He's overestimating his influence in the actual medical community as opposed to the business side. Your research speaks for itself, Dr. Powell, and once you present tomorrow, your position will be even stronger." The car pulled away from the terminal, merging into London's morning traffic. Through the window, Jasmine caught glimpses of the city red double-decker buses, historic buildings alongside modern glass structures, the distinctive shape of the Shard rising in the distance. "The conference has arranged a suite for you at the Savoy," Dr. Foster explained. "You'll have time to rest before the welcome reception this evening. Your presentation is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow in the main hall." "Thank you," Jasmine said, trying to focus on the professional opportunity ahead rather than the drama behind her. "I appreciate the support." "It's well-deserved," Dr. Foster assured her. "And don't worry about Richard Daniels. Men like him make threats because it's easier than acknowledging that the world is changing around them." As they crossed the Thames, Jasmine felt a sense of cautious optimism returning. She had made it to London despite everything. Her presentation was ready. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Richard Daniels, take it from her. What she didn't yet realize was that Captain Reynolds' decision to stand firm against prejudice had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in a much more dramatic confrontation, one that would forever change the trajectory of multiple lives, including her own. Are you ready to see Richard Daniels get what's coming to him? Drop a comment with your predictions about what will happen at the conference. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of dignity and justice. The International Medical Innovation Conference was being held at the Royal Albert Hall, its distinctive domed roof gleaming in the morning sunlight as Jasmine approached. The historic venue, usually home to concerts and performances, had been transformed into a hub of medical advancement with digital screens displaying breakthrough research and the latest technological innovations. Jasmine had slept surprisingly well at the Savoy, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion after the stressful flight. She had spent the early morning reviewing her presentation one final time, making small adjustments to her delivery based on feedback from Dr. Foster at the previous night's welcome reception. Now, dressed in a tailored navy suit with a silky cream blouse, her hair styled in an elegant updo, she radiated quiet confidence as she entered the venue. Her ID badge marked her as both an attendee and a presenter, granting her access to the speaker's lounge and priority seating. The main hall was already filling with the world's leading cardiac specialists, research scientists, medical technology developers, and hospital administrators. Jasmine recognized several prominent figures in her field, including surgeons whose techniques she had studied during her residency. Dr. Foster met her at the entrance to the speaker's lounge. "Perfect timing, Dr. Powell. Alexander Blackwood has just arrived and expressed interest in meeting you before the sessions begin." Jasmine's heartbeat quickened. Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Medical Technologies, was a legend in the field, a former cardiac surgeon who had transitioned to the business side of medicine, building Meridian into a powerhouse of medical innovation. His support could elevate her research from promising to industry-changing. "I'd be honored," she replied. Dr. Foster led her through the lounge to a corner where a distinguished man in his 60s stood conversing with a small group. He had silver hair, keen blue eyes, and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding attention. Alexander Dr. Foster called. "May I present Dr. Jasmine Powell, our keynote presenter on minimally invasive cardiac techniques?" Blackwood turned his expression lighting with genuine interest. "Dr. Powell, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your preliminary paper on reduced incision bypass alternatives was brilliant." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. That means a great deal coming from you." "Please, it's Alexander. And I should be thanking you. Your research could revolutionize how we approach cardiac care in our facilities." They launched into a technical discussion of Jasmine's technique with Blackwood, asking insightful questions that demonstrated his continued engagement with the medical aspects of his business. As they talked, Jasmine noticed his chief operating officer, a younger man named James Wilson, taking notes. "We're particularly interested in the recovery time reduction," Wilson commented. "From a hospital efficiency standpoint, reducing post-operative stays by 60% would transform capacity planning." "That's been one of the most consistent outcomes in our trials," Jasmine confirmed. "Patients are often able to return home within 48 hours, compared to 5 to 7 days, with traditional techniques." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance to the lounge. Jasmine looked up to see Richard Daniels and Madison entering, Richard's voice carrying as he introduced himself to the security personnel checking credentials. "Richard Daniels, Daniels Construction. I'm meeting with Alexander Blackwood about the Meridian Research Facility." Blackwood checked his watch with a slight frown. "He's early. We're not scheduled to meet until this afternoon." Richard spotted them and began making his way over, steering Madison by the elbow. His expression flickered briefly when he recognized Jasmine, but he quickly recovered, plastering on a charismatic smile. "Alexander, good to see you," he boomed, extending his hand. "I hope you don't mind my dropping in before our meeting. Madison and I were already here for the conference." Richard Blackwood acknowledged, shaking his hand with professional courtesy rather than enthusiasm. "I wasn't aware you had an interest in cardiac surgical techniques." "Always interested in the medical advances our facilities will house," Richard replied smoothly. His gaze shifted to Jasmine. "Dr. Powell and I are already acquainted, actually. We were on the same flight from New York." Jasmine maintained her composure, offering a professional nod. "Mr. Daniels." Madison stood slightly behind her father, looking uncomfortable. She gave Jasmine a small, apologetic smile. "Is that so?" Blackwood looked between them with mild curiosity. "Well, Doctor, Powell will be presenting the very innovations our new research center will be advancing. Her work is precisely why we're expanding our cardiac division." Richard's smile became slightly strained. "Fascinating. I look forward to hearing her presentation." An announcement over the PA system saved Jasmine from further awkward conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen, the opening session will begin in 15 minutes. Presenters, please proceed to the backstage area for final preparations." "That's my cue," Jasmine said. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Alexander. I look forward to continuing our discussion after the presentation." "Absolutely," Blackwood replied warmly. "Good luck, though I doubt you'll need it." As Jasmine moved away, she heard Richard smoothly transition to business matters. "Alexander, while I have you here, I wanted to mention some exciting enhancements we've incorporated into the research facility plans." Dr. Foster accompanied Jasmine toward the backstage area. Richard wasted no time, she observed. Showing up early to ambush Blackwood is typical of his tactics. "Will he be at my presentation?" Jasmine asked. "Undoubtedly. If Blackwood is interested in your work, Richard will want to understand why. That's how he operates, always positioning himself adjacent to influence." Dr. Foster patted Jasmine's arm reassuringly. "Don't let it distract you. Your research is what matters today." Backstage, Jasmine met the other presenters for her session and checked that her slides were loaded correctly in the system. Through it all, she maintained her focus, mentally rehearsing key points and anticipating questions. When it was finally time for her to take the stage, she felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same focused tranquility that accompanied her into complex surgeries. This was her element. This was where she belonged. "Ladies and gentlemen," the session chair announced, "it is my honor to introduce Dr. Jasmine Powell, whose groundbreaking work in minimally invasive cardiac surgery is changing our understanding of what's possible in the operating room. Please welcome Dr. Powell." The applause was respectful as Jasmine took the stage. She glanced over the audience, noting Blackwood in the front row, Richard and Madison several rows behind him, and scattered throughout some of the most brilliant medical minds in the world. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Today I'm going to share with you a technique that reduces surgical trauma by 70%, decreases recovery time by 60%, and most importantly makes life-saving cardiac procedures accessible to patients previously considered too high risk for traditional surgery." For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine commanded the room, guiding the audience through her innovative approach with the precision and clarity that had distinguished her medical career. She showed videos of the technique in action, presented compelling data from clinical trials, and explained how this approach could be implemented in hospitals around the world with minimal additional training for experienced cardiac teams. As she concluded, the applause was no longer merely respectful, it was enthusiastic, with several audience members rising to their feet. The questions that followed were engaged and thoughtful, demonstrating that her peers understood the significance of what she had presented. When the session ended, she was immediately surrounded by colleagues eager to discuss collaboration opportunities and implementation strategies. Through the crowd, she caught glimpses of Blackwood in animated conversation with his executive team, and of Richard Daniels, his expression unreadable as he observed the positive reception to her work. Dr. Foster eventually rescued her from the crush of interested colleagues. "That was exceptional," she said, guiding Jasmine toward a quieter area. "Alexander wants you to join him for lunch to discuss potential applications at Meridian's facilities." "I'd be delighted," Jasmine replied, still riding the high of a successful presentation. As they made their way toward the exit, Madison suddenly appeared beside them. "Dr. Powell," she said breathlessly, "that was amazing. I didn't understand all of it, but the way everyone reacted, you're like a rock star to these people." Jasmine smiled, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. "Thank you, Madison. How are you doing?" "Okay, I guess. My dad's been on the phone with my mom all morning. She's trying to get on another flight, but the airline has suspended her account pending review." She lowered her voice. "Dad's furious, but he's trying not to show it because of his meeting with Mr. Blackwood." Madison Richards' sharp voice cut through their conversation as he approached. "There you are. We need to go prepare for my meeting." He nodded stiffly to Jasmine and Dr. Foster. "Ladies, congratulations on your presentation, Dr. Powell. Most illuminating." "Thank you, Mr. Daniels." "Come, Madison." He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, steering her away. "He's worried," Dr. Foster observed once they were out of earshot. "And he should be. Alexander was clearly impressed with your work. That creates a connection between you and Meridian that Richard wasn't expecting." "I'm not trying to interfere with his business," Jasmine said. "Of course not. But in Richard's world, relationships are currency. You've just established yourself as valuable to someone he needs to impress." Dr. Foster checked her watch. "We should head to the private dining room. Alexander doesn't like to be kept waiting even for the guest of honor." As they navigated through the crowded corridors of the Royal Albert Hall, Jasmine couldn't help but reflect on the strange intersection of her professional triumph with the personal drama that had begun on the flight. She had come to London focused solely on presenting her research. Now, somehow, she had become entangled in a web of business interests and personal vendettas that extended far beyond the operating room. The medical conference had just become the stage for the next act in a drama none of them could have anticipated. Is anyone else loving how Jasmine's dignity and brilliance are shining through despite Richard's attempts to intimidate her? Hit that like button. If you're cheering for her, the confrontation is building to an incredible climax that you won't want to miss. The International Medical Innovation Conference traditionally concluded with a black tie gala at the Natural History Museum, where the iconic Hinsey Hall, dominated by the massive blue whale skeleton suspended from the ceiling, was transformed into an elegant dining space. Round tables draped in white linen filled the hall, each centered with elaborate floral arrangements illuminated by the soft glow of candles. Jasmine arrived wearing a simple but stunning floor-length gown in midnight blue, its classic silhouette complemented by the diamond studs, her parents' gift, that caught the light as she moved. Her hair was arranged in an elegant updo, accentuating her graceful neck and poised bearing. The day had been a whirlwind following her presentation. Lunch with Alexander Blackwood had evolved into an impromptu strategy session with Meridian's executives, exploring ways to implement her technique across their hospital network. Blackwood had been particularly interested in the applications for underserved communities where the reduced recovery time and lower complication rates could prove transformative. Dr. Powell, Dr. Foster called, waving her over to a table near the front of the hall. "You're seated with us at the head table." Jasmine made her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from colleagues she had impressed during her presentation. The head table, she discovered, included Alexander Blackwood, several distinguished medical pioneers, and the conference organizers. The woman of the hour, Blackwood said warmly as she took her seat beside him. "Your presentation has been the talk of the conference. James has already initiated discussions with our implementation team about incorporating your technique into our standard protocols." "That's incredibly gratifying," Jasmine replied. "It's what every researcher hopes for, seeing their work make a real-world impact." "It's more than impact, Dr. Powell. It's transformation, which is precisely what Meridian stands for." Blackwood lowered his voice slightly. "Between us, I've been questioning whether Daniels Construction is the right partner for our new research facility. Their technical capabilities are sound, but I'm increasingly concerned about their corporate culture and values alignment." Jasmine chose her words carefully. "I wouldn't presume to advise you on business matters, Alexander. No, but your experience with the Daniels family has provided an unexpected window into their character. Richard has been lobbying aggressively for this contract, but something feels off. My instincts are usually reliable in these matters." Before Jasmine could respond, a commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Veronica Daniels had arrived, her designer gown and glittering jewelry announcing her presence as effectively as a trumpet fanfare. Despite looking somewhat travel-worn, she had clearly made efforts to prepare for the gala, her makeup immaculate and her blonde hair freshly styled. Richard and Madison moved quickly to greet her, Richard's expression a mixture of relief and barely concealed tension. The family exchanged words too distant to hear, but the body language was telling Richard, gesturing emphatically. Veronica responding with sharp, clipped movements, Madison standing awkwardly between them. "It appears Mrs. Daniels managed to find another flight," Dr. Foster observed, having joined their table. "That's unfortunate." "Indeed," Blackwood murmured. "This should be interesting." The Daniels family made their way into the hall, Richard leading his wife and daughter toward their assigned table on the opposite side of the room. As they passed the head table, Veronica's gaze fell on Jasmine. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a flush of anger that spread across her face like wildfire. "You," she exclaimed, loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Richard, that's her?" "The woman from the plane." Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm. "Veronica, not here," he hissed. But Veronica was not to be silenced. "Do you have any idea what I've been through because of you? The humiliation of being escorted off a plane, being stranded in New York, having to fly economy to get here." The entire hall fell silent. Every conversation ceased. Every head turned toward the unfolding drama. It was as if someone had pressed pause on the elegant evening, freezing everyone except the main players in this unexpected confrontation. Jasmine maintained her composure, acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. "Mrs. Daniels, this isn't the place. Don't you dare tell me what's appropriate." Veronica snapped, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You've ruined what should have been a triumphant trip for our family." "Veronica," Richard's voice was sharp with warning. "That's enough." Madison looked mortified, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, please stop." Blackwood stood slowly, his imposing presence immediately commanding attention. "Mrs. Daniels, I presume I'm Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Medical Technologies." Veronica faltered, suddenly registering that her outburst was occurring in front of the very person her husband needed to impress. Mr. Blackwood. Of course. It's a pleasure to meet you. Is it? Blackwood's tone was icy. Because from where I stand, it appears you're publicly berating one of our most valued medical partners at what should be a celebration of innovation and achievement. There's been a misunderstanding, Richard interjected smoothly, trying to salvage the situation. My wife had a difficult travel experience, but we're all here now to support the remarkable work being presented at this conference. Veronica seemed torn between continuing her attack on Jasmine and recognizing the strategic disaster unfolding. Self-preservation won barely. Yes, of course, she said, her tone shifting to artificial pleasantness. Just a momentary reaction to an unexpected sight. I apologize for the disruption. Blackwood's expression remained skeptical. Dr. Powell is our guest of honor tonight. Her research represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking Meridian values in its partnerships. The emphasis on partnerships was subtle but unmistakable. Richard's face tightened with understanding his deal was in jeopardy. Dr. Powell's work is indeed impressive, Richard acknowledged, attempting to project sincere admiration. We were just discussing how perfectly suited our new facility would be for implementing her techniques. Were you? Blackwood raised an eyebrow. How fortuitous. Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss these synergies more formally. It was a power move, forcing the Daniels family into an unplanned negotiation in a public setting where Veronica's behavior had already put them at a disadvantage. Richard hesitated, then nodded. We would be honored. At Blackwood's gesture, additional chairs were brought to the head table. The Daniels family was effectively trapped, unable to decline without further damaging their prospects, yet clearly uncomfortable with the arrangement. As they settled into their seats, Jasmine found herself directly across from Veronica, whose barely contained hostility radiated across the table like heat from a furnace. Madison sat beside her mother, looking as though she wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. Richard maintained a facade of professional engagement, though the strain showed around his eyes. Now, Blackwood said, once they were all seated, I understand there was some incident on your flight, Mrs. Daniels, involving Dr. Powell. The atmosphere grew even more tense. 200 distinguished medical professionals sat in silent witness to this unexpected confrontation, many leaning forward slightly to catch every word. Veronica opened her mouth to respond, but Richard cut her off. A minor misunderstanding about seating arrangements. Nothing worth dwelling on. I see. Blackwood's tone suggested he saw quite clearly. Dr. Powell, would you characterize it as a minor misunderstanding? All eyes turned to Jasmine. She could feel the weight of the moment. Her response could potentially destroy the Daniels' business prospects. Despite everything, she felt no desire to exact revenge. She simply wanted the truth acknowledged. There was a disagreement about assigned seating, she said carefully. It escalated to a point where the captain felt intervention was necessary. I'm sure we can all agree it's unfortunate when air travel becomes stressful. It was diplomatically phrased, neither absolving Veronica nor driving the knife deeper. Madison shot her a grateful look. Blackwood seemed to consider this. Captain Reynolds is an old friend, actually. We served in the Gulf War together before either of us entered our current fields. I received a rather interesting call from him this morning. Richard's expression froze. Oh, yes. Quite illuminating. Blackwood didn't elaborate further, letting the implication hang in the air. But enough about travel troubles. We're here to celebrate medical innovation. Dr. Powell, I believe the awards ceremony will include special recognition of your work. The conversation shifted to safer territory, though the underlying tension remained. Throughout dinner, Veronica alternated between forced smiles when Blackwood was engaging with her and venomous glares at Jasmine when she thought no one was looking. Richard became increasingly tense as he observed the easy rapport between Jasmine and Blackwood, clearly recognizing the threat to his business interests. Madison, seated between her parents, barely spoke, picking at her food without appetite. Occasionally, she would glance at Jasmine with an expression that mingled admiration with apology. As the meal concluded and the awards ceremony began, Jasmine was called to the stage to receive special recognition for her breakthrough research. The applause was thunderous, with Blackwood leading a standing ovation. When she returned to the table, Veronica's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," she hissed to Richard, not quite quietly enough. "She's being treated like some kind of hero while I was humiliated and inconvenienced because of her." "Because of her," Madison whispered incredulously. "Mom, she didn't do anything wrong. She was just sitting in her assigned seat. You were the one who—" "Be quiet, Madison," Veronica snapped. "You don't understand how the world works." "I understand basic decency," Madison replied with unexpected firmness. "And what happened on that plane wasn't decent." Richard placed a warning hand on his daughter's arm. "This isn't the time, Madison. It never is." "Is it?" Madison's voice was quiet but clear. "We never talk about how Mom treats people. We just pretend it's normal." Veronica's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me that way? After everything we've given you—" "Ladies," Blackwood interrupted smoothly, "perhaps we could continue the evening without further discord. This is, after all, a celebration." The rebuke, though gently delivered, silenced the brewing argument. Veronica retreated into tight-lipped silence, while Madison stared down at her plate. Richard attempted to recover the situation, launching into an enthusiastic description of the features planned for the Meridian Research Facility. The surgical suites would be perfect for Dr. Powell's techniques, he emphasized. State-of-the-art imaging capabilities, integrated data systems for real-time monitoring. "It does sound impressive," Blackwood acknowledged, "though of course any facility built for Meridian would need to embody our core values as well as our technical requirements." "Absolutely," Richard agreed quickly. "We're fully aligned with Meridian's vision and values." "Are you?" Blackwood's gaze shifted between Richard and Veronica thoughtfully. "I wonder." The tension at the table was palpable now. Richard's professional smile was frozen in place while Veronica seethed silently. Madison looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between her parents' ambitions and her own emerging sense of right and wrong. Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor throughout, refusing to be drawn into the personal drama. She had presented her research successfully, earned recognition from her peers, and established a valuable connection with Meridian. That was what mattered, not the Daniels family's internal conflicts or business prospects. As the evening progressed with speeches, awards, and networking, the tension at the head table remained unresolved. Jasmine engaged warmly with colleagues and responded graciously to congratulations, while the Daniels family sat in strained silence, the collapse of their carefully constructed facade visible to anyone watching closely. The reckoning that had begun on Flight 237 was reaching its climax, though in a setting none of them could have anticipated. And the final act was yet to come. Who's feeling the tension right now? Hit that like button. If you're on the edge of your seat, the confrontation between Jasmine and the Daniels family is about to reach its explosive conclusion, and you won't believe how karma finally catches up to them. The final day of the conference began with a series of breakfast roundtables where attendees could engage in focused discussions with leading experts. Jasmine had been invited to lead one such session, guiding a group of surgeons and researchers through the finer points of her technique. She arrived early to set up her materials, gratified to see that her table was already full, with additional chairs being brought in to accommodate the interest. As she arranged her demonstration models, she noticed Captain Reynolds entering the hall, scanning the room with the same alert awareness he brought to the cockpit. Their eyes met, and he smiled, making his way toward her table. "Dr. Powell," he greeted her warmly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all." "Captain Reynolds," she replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "I didn't expect to see you here. My brother, Dr. William Reynolds, is presenting in the cardiothoracic imaging session. I'm his guest today." He gestured to the man beside him, a distinguished surgeon Jasmine recognized from medical journals. "Plus, Alexander Blackwood is an old friend. When he heard I was the captain on your flight, he insisted I come by." "It's wonderful to see you again," Jasmine said sincerely. "Your actions on that flight meant more than you know." "I was just doing my job," he replied modestly. "Ensuring the dignity of all passengers is part of that job." They chatted briefly about the conference and her successful presentation before Captain Reynolds and his brother moved on to their assigned session. As they departed, Jasmine caught sight of Richard Daniels entering the hall, his expression grim. He stopped short upon seeing Captain Reynolds' recognition flashing in his eyes, followed by a carefully masked alarm. The breakfast roundtable proceeded smoothly with engaged discussion and thoughtful questions. Jasmine was in her element, guiding her colleagues through complex technical details while maintaining an accessible approach. As the session concluded, attendees lingered exchanging contact information and discussing potential collaborations. Dr. Powell, a familiar voice, interrupted. Richard Daniels stood at the edge of the group waiting for her attention. "Might I have a word?" The other doctors sensed the tension and discreetly moved away, giving them space. Mr. Daniels' Jasmine acknowledged maintaining her professional composure. "I wanted to clear the air." He began, his tone carefully modulated. "Last night's dinner was uncomfortable for everyone. I fear my wife's reaction may have given you the wrong impression about our family and our values." Jasmine waited, sensing there was more to this approach than a simple apology. "Veronica has been under tremendous stress lately," he continued. "Her behavior on the flight was uncharacteristic and regrettable." The lie came smoothly practiced. "I hope we can move past this unfortunate incident." "I have no interest in prolonging any conflict," Mr. Daniels' Jasmine replied honestly. Relief flickered across his face. "I'm glad to hear that. Alexander speaks very highly of you, and your work is clearly exceptional. In fact, I'd like to discuss how our new facility could be tailored specifically to accommodate your surgical innovation." The pivot to business was transparent. He was attempting to create an alliance where there had been animosity, recognizing that her influence with Blackwood could affect his contract prospects. "That's a discussion that would need to include the Meridian team," Jasmine said carefully. Of course," Richard agreed quickly. "Perhaps the three of us, you, myself, and Alexander, could meet before the closing session. I think we could find significant common ground." Before Jasmine could respond, Madison approached, looking uncomfortable. "Mom's looking for you. She's not happy." Richard's expression tightened momentarily before smoothing into a professional smile. "Tell her I'll be there shortly. Dr. Powell and I are having an important discussion." Madison hesitated. "She's really upset, Dad. Something about Captain Reynolds being here." That caught Richard's full attention. "What about Captain Reynolds?" "She saw him talking with Mr. Blackwood." "She's freaking out." Richard's carefully constructed facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine alarm. "Where are they?" "By the main entrance," Madison replied. "Mr. Blackwood was introducing the captain to some hospital directors." "I need to go," Richard said abruptly to Jasmine. "We'll continue this discussion later." As he strode away, Madison remained behind, looking torn. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "My mom's been on the warpath since she saw Captain Reynolds this morning. She's convinced there's some conspiracy against her." "There's no conspiracy," Jasmine assured her. The captain is here because his brother is a presenting surgeon. It's just a coincidence. Madison shook her head. Try telling her that. She thinks you arranged it somehow to embarrass her in front of Mr. Blackwood. The absurdity of the accusation might have been amusing if it weren't so revealing of Veronica's distorted worldview. Madison, I promise you I had no idea Captain Reynolds would be here. I believe you, Madison said. But my parents, they see the world differently. Everything's personal. Everything's about power and status. There was wisdom in the girl's assessment that belied her 16 years, the perspective of someone who had grown up observing the toxic dynamics of privilege and entitlement. Are you okay? Jasmine asked gently. This can't be easy for you. Madison shrugged, attempting nonchalance, though her eyes revealed deeper emotions. I'm used to it. But... She hesitated, then continued in a rush. I've been thinking about what you said on the plane, about charting your own path. I'm applying to pre-med programs next year. I haven't told my parents yet. That's wonderful, Jasmine said warmly. Medicine is challenging but incredibly rewarding. My dad wants me to study business, take over the company someday. Madison's expression grew determined. But that's not who I want to be. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance. Veronica's voice, raised in anger, carried across the hall. This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe him over me. Heads turned. Conference attendees watched with uncomfortable fascination as the drama unfolded. Richard was attempting to calm his wife, whose gestures were becoming increasingly animated. Captain Reynolds stood nearby, his expression neutral but watchful. Alexander Blackwood observed the scene with a frown of disapproval. I should go, Madison said, her face flushing with embarrassment. Try to help calm her down. Madison Jasmine called softly as the girl turned to leave. Remember what I said about being your own person. That takes courage. Madison nodded, a small smile touching her lips, despite the chaos awaiting her. Thank you. For everything. As Madison hurried toward her parents, Jasmine began gathering her materials, intending to avoid being drawn into the conflict. Dr. Foster appeared at her side, her expression concerned. Quite the spectacle, she commented quietly. Veronica Daniels seems determined to sabotage whatever remains of her husband's business prospects. What happened? Jasmine asked. From what I gathered, Captain Reynolds was discussing the flight incident with Alexander when Veronica spotted them. She confronted the captain, accused him of professional misconduct, and demanded he retract his incident report. When Alexander defended the captain's actions, she became, well, you can see for yourself. Across the hall, security personnel were moving toward Veronica, who was still gesticulating wildly, her voice carrying fragments of accusations and demands. Richard looked ashen, clearly recognizing the damage being done to his reputation with every word his wife uttered. It's escalating beyond mere embarrassment now, Dr. Foster observed. This could have serious consequences for Daniels Construction's contract prospects. I never wanted that, Jasmine said honestly. Despite everything, I don't wish for their professional ruin. That's because you're a better person than they are, Dr. Foster replied simply. Come, Alexander asked, that you join him in the executive lounge before the closing session. I think decisions are being made that you should be part of. As they made their way toward the exit, skirting the ongoing confrontation, Jasmine glanced back once. Madison stood slightly apart from her parents, her posture reflecting both embarrassment and resolution, the stance of someone who was beginning to envision a different future for herself. That Jasmine thought might be the most positive outcome of this unfortunate collision of worlds. One young woman finding the courage to break the cycle of privilege and prejudice that had shaped her family's worldview. In the executive lounge, Alexander Blackwood was engaged in intense conversation with James Wilson and several other Meridian executives. Captain Reynolds sat nearby, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension evident in the room. Blackwood looked up as Jasmine and Dr. Foster entered. "Ah, Dr. Powell. Thank you for joining us. We find ourselves at something of a crossroads regarding Meridian's expansion plans. I'm not sure how I can help with business decisions," Jasmine said cautiously. "This is about more than business," Blackwood replied. "It's about values, culture, and the kind of partnerships that will define Meridian's future." He gestured for her to sit. "Captain Reynolds has been filling in some details about the flight incident that I find illuminating." Captain Reynolds nodded to Jasmine. "I hope you don't mind, Dr. Powell. Alexander asked for my perspective as part of Meridian's due diligence process." "Of course not," Jasmine assured him. "The incident on the flight, troubling as it was, might have been dismissed as an isolated occurrence," Blackwood explained, leaning forward earnestly. "But what we've witnessed here at the conference demonstrates a pattern of behavior that raises serious concerns about the Daniels family and, by extension, the corporate culture at Daniels Construction." The room fell completely silent. Everyone present understood the implications of what Blackwood was saying. This wasn't just about a single unpleasant incident. It was about fundamental values that would shape a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "In medicine, we often talk about creating healing environments," Blackwood continued. "But how can we trust a construction partner to build such environments if their own leadership demonstrates such disregard for human dignity?" Jasmine considered her response carefully. "Mr. Blackwood, while I appreciate your concern, I wouldn't want my personal experience to unduly influence a major business decision." "Your experience isn't the sole factor," Dr. Powell James Wilson assured her. "It simply confirmed what our own due diligence was suggesting, that beneath the polished proposal and technical specifications, there are fundamental character issues we cannot ignore." Captain Reynolds nodded in agreement. "In aviation, we have a concept called just culture, the understanding that safety depends not just on technical systems, but on people feeling empowered to speak up when something's wrong. If someone's too intimidated to report a potential problem because of how they might be treated, the entire system becomes vulnerable." Blackwood absorbed this, nodding thoughtfully. "The parallels to medical research are striking." He turned to Jasmine. "What would you do, Dr. Powell, if you were in my position?" The question caught Jasmine by surprise. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't think it's my place." "Indulge me," he insisted gently. "Not as a business consultant, but as someone whose work will potentially be conducted in this facility. Someone who has experienced firsthand how the Daniels family responds to perceived challenges to their status and privilege." Jasmine considered carefully before responding. "In medicine, we often talk about technical skill versus bedside manner. Both matter. A surgeon can be technically brilliant, but if they don't respect their team, if they create a toxic environment, mistakes happen. People suffer." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "The facility you build will stand for decades. The culture you establish within it will shape the work that happens there. If that foundation is built on disrespect and entitlement, no amount of technical excellence will overcome the damage." A heavy silence followed her words. What she had articulated wasn't just about the Daniels family or a construction contract. It was about the values that would underpin life-saving medical innovations for generations to come. "Well said," Blackwood replied finally. "I believe we have our answer." He stood, indicating the meeting was concluding. "Dr. Powell, Captain Reynolds, I'd like you both to join us for the meeting with Richard Daniels this afternoon." "Me?" Jasmine asked, surprised. "Why?" "Because you represent exactly what Meridian stands for: innovation driven by integrity. And because I believe in closing loops properly. The situation that began on that flight should be resolved with all parties present." As the meeting concluded and they prepared to return to the conference sessions, Jasmine felt a mixture of apprehension and resolution. She hadn't sought this role in the unfolding drama, but perhaps her presence could help ensure that the resolution was based on truth and integrity rather than power and intimidation. The connection between the flight incident and the business decision now facing Meridian had become clear. What remained to be seen was how Richard and Veronica Daniels would respond when the consequences of their behavior finally caught up with them. Have you ever witnessed someone's true character revealed in a crisis? Tag a friend who needs to see this story of accountability and consequences. The final showdown is about to begin, and you won't believe how it ends. The Meridian Executive Suite, located in a private area of the conference venue, was designed for high-level business discussions. Sleek furnishings and muted tones created an atmosphere of refined professionalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of London, the Thames winding through the city like a silver thread. Jasmine arrived precisely on time, having changed from her conference attire into a tailored charcoal suit that projected quiet authority. Alexander Blackwood greeted her warmly, introducing her to several Meridian executives who had joined for the meeting. Captain Reynolds was also present, seated discreetly to one side. "Richard should be here momentarily," Blackwood explained, gesturing for Jasmine to take a seat at the long conference table. "I've asked him to come alone, though I suspect Veronica may attempt to accompany him." As if on cue, voices became audible in the corridor outside. Richard's measured tones contrasted with Veronica's more insistent cadence. "This is a business meeting," Veronica, they heard Richard say, strain evident in his voice. "Your presence isn't necessary or appropriate." "Don't be naive, Richard," Veronica replied sharply. "After everything that's happened, you need me there. I can explain the situation properly." The door opened and Richard entered alone, though the set of his shoulders suggested the victory had been hard-won. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, projecting the confidence of a man accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. His expression betrayed only momentary surprise at seeing Jasmine and Captain Reynolds before he smoothed it into a professional smile. Alexander he greeted warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for making time for this discussion. I believe we have much to finalize about the research facility contract." Blackwood shook his hand with formal courtesy. "Richard, please have a seat. There are indeed several matters we need to address." Richard took his place at the table, setting his briefcase beside him. "I've brought the updated proposals with the modifications we discussed yesterday. I believe you'll find we've incorporated all of Meridian's suggestions regarding the specialized surgical suites." He opened the briefcase and began removing glossy presentation folders, sliding one toward each person at the table. His movements were precise, practiced a man who had closed countless deals in rooms just like this one. "Before we review those materials," Blackwood interjected smoothly, "I'd like to address some concerns that have arisen regarding Daniels Construction's alignment with Meridian's core values and culture." Richard's hand stilled momentarily before he completed the distribution of the folders. Of course, he replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Values alignment is essential for any successful partnership." "I'm glad you agree," Blackwood said, "because recent events have raised serious questions about whether Daniels Construction embodies the principles Meridian considers non-negotiable in its business relationships." Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "If you're referring to the unfortunate incident involving my wife on the flight, I can assure you that was an isolated occurrence during a particularly stressful time. It doesn't reflect our company's values or standard of conduct." "I wish that were true," Blackwood replied. "However, what Captain Reynolds witnessed on that flight, combined with the behavior exhibited by both you and your wife at this conference, suggests otherwise." Color rose in Richard's face. "I don't see how personal matters relate to our business agreement, Alexander. Daniels Construction has an impeccable record of delivering world-class medical facilities on time and on budget. The character clause in our contract explicitly states that all parties must demonstrate integrity, respect, and inclusive values," James Wilson interjected, opening a legal document before him. These aren't just words on paper, Mr. Daniels. They're fundamental to how Meridian conducts business. The room fell silent. Everyone present could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a routine business meeting. It was a reckoning. And you're suggesting that my company fails to meet these standards based on a seating dispute? Richard's voice remained controlled, but an edge of defensiveness had crept in. Captain Reynolds spoke for the first time. It wasn't merely a seating dispute, Mr. Daniels. It was a clear case of harassment and discrimination. Your wife's behavior toward Dr. Powell was explicitly based on prejudicial assumptions. You misunderstood the situation, Richard countered. Veronica was concerned about being separated from our daughter. Any parent would be protective. Madison is 16 years old, Captain Reynolds pointed out mildly. Hardly a child requiring constant supervision. And that doesn't explain the attempted bribe, the deliberately spilled water, or the racially charged comments. Richard's gaze flicked to Jasmine, a flash of calculation crossing his features. Dr. Powell, surely you don't support this? Characterization of events. My wife may have been overzealous in her desire to sit with our daughter, but to suggest racial motivations is extreme. Jasmine met his gaze steadily. Mr. Daniels, I've made no accusations about your wife's motivations. I simply declined to give up my assigned seat when demanded. The events that followed, including your wife's comments, the attempted bribe, and the water incident, are documented facts witnessed by multiple passengers and captured on video. Video. Richard's composure slipped momentarily. What video Michael Turner's recording, Captain Reynolds explained. The businessman in seat 2A documented the entire confrontation. The airline has a copy as part of the incident report, as does Meridian now. Richard's expression hardened. This feels suspiciously like a coordinated effort to undermine my company's business interests. I wonder if there are legal implications to using a private dispute to influence a $200 million contract decision. It was a veiled threat, and Blackwood recognized it as such. No one is coordinating anything, Richard. We're simply conducting due diligence as we would with any major contract. Character matters in long-term business relationships. Besides, James Wilson added the character clause was included in the preliminary agreements you signed 3 months ago. It's legally binding and explicitly permits termination if evidence emerges of conduct inconsistent with Meridian's values. Richard's eyes narrowed as he realized the severity of his situation. What exactly are you saying, Alexander? That you're canceling a $200 million contract because my wife had an argument over airplane seating? I'm saying that the partner we select for this project will help shape Meridian's future. Blackwood replied evenly. The research facility will house diverse teams of scientists and medical professionals from around the world. We need a partner who understands that dignity and respect are non-negotiable in every interaction, not just when it's convenient or profitable. The tension in the room was palpable. Richard's facade of reasonable negotiation began to crack, revealing the desperate calculation beneath. This is absurd. He exploded, his voice rising. You're willing to delay a critical expansion over something this trivial? Think of the costs, the setbacks to your timeline. We have considered those factors, Blackwood acknowledged, and we've concluded that compromising on our values would ultimately cost us far more. The door to the conference room burst open, and Veronica strode in, ignoring the startled reactions of those present. Richard, what's taking so long? The contract should have been signed by now. Her gaze swept the room, widening in outrage when she spotted Jasmine and Captain Reynolds. What are they doing here? This is a business meeting, not a tribunal. Richard rose quickly. Veronica, I asked you to wait outside. This is a delicate negotiation. Negotiation? She scoffed. There's nothing to negotiate. Either they want the best construction company for their facility or they don't. And if they're letting personal matters influence business decisions, perhaps we should reconsider whether we want to work with them at all. The room fell silent. Richard's face had gone pale, his careful strategy demolished by his wife's interruption. Blackwood broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Daniels, this meeting is by invitation only. I must ask you to leave." "I will not. I'm the wife of the CEO of Daniels Construction. I have every right to be here." "Actually, you don't," James Wilson stated flatly. "This is a private business discussion with legally binding confidentiality requirements. Your presence, without prior authorization, could be construed as a breach of the non-disclosure agreement Mr. Daniels signed." Veronica looked to her husband for support, but Richard was staring at her with barely concealed fury. "Veronica," he said through clenched teeth, "please wait outside. Richard, you can't seriously be letting them." "Now, Veronica." His tone left no room for argument. With a final glare at Jasmine and Captain Reynolds, Veronica stalked out, slamming the door behind her. Richard turned back to the table, attempting to salvage what he could. "I apologize for the interruption. As you can see, my wife is passionate about our company's interests, sometimes excessively so. But her actions shouldn't reflect on Daniels Construction's professionalism or capabilities." Richard Blackwood said almost gently, "A company's culture is set at the top. What we've witnessed not just on the flight but here at the conference and now in this very room reveals a pattern that concerns us deeply." The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Everyone could sense that a final decision was about to be rendered. "I'm saying that Meridian has decided not to proceed with Daniels Construction for our new research facility." The words landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Richard stood motionless, the implications washing over him in waves. $200 million. The largest contract of the year, perhaps of his career. Gone. "You can't be serious," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Over this?" "Not just this," Blackwood corrected. "Over what this reveals about your company's values and culture. The research we'll conduct in this facility will save countless lives, including the lives of people your wife deemed unworthy of sitting in first class. I cannot in good conscience build that future on a foundation of prejudice and disrespect." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of London traffic below. It was as if time itself had paused to acknowledge the weight of what had just occurred. Richard's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Alexander." "My lawyers will what James Wilson interjected. The character clause is ironclad. You signed it. We have documented evidence of conduct that violates it. Any legal challenge would simply prolong the inevitable while generating negative publicity for your company." The truth of this assessment seemed to penetrate Richard's anger. His shoulders sagged slightly, the first visible sign of defeat. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Meridian will issue a formal notice of contract termination citing the character clause Wilson explained. We'll proceed with our second-choice bidder, assuming they meet all our requirements, and the announcement will be handled discreetly," Blackwood assured him. "We have no desire to publicly humiliate you or your company. This isn't about punishment, Richard. It's about upholding principles." Richard gathered his untouched presentation folders with mechanical precision, returning them to his briefcase. His movements were deliberate, as if focusing on this simple task could prevent him from confronting the magnitude of what had just occurred. When he looked up, his gaze settled on Jasmine. "I suppose you're satisfied," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "You've cost me the biggest contract of the year." "I never wanted that, Mr. Daniels," Jasmine replied calmly. "I simply wanted to sit in my assigned seat and travel to London to present my research. Everything that followed was the result of choices made by you and your family. Your money buys buildings, Mr. Daniels," she added quietly but firmly. "But it doesn't buy you the right to diminish others' dignity." The room fell silent again. Not a cough, not a rustle of papers, Not even the sound of breathing seemed audible. For 10 full seconds, everyone present held their breath, witnessing a moment of profound truth. Richard snapped his briefcase closed with unnecessary force. I have nothing more to say, except that you'll be hearing from my legal team, Alexander. I guarantee it. That's your right, Blackwood acknowledged. But before you leave, there's one more thing I think you should know. Richard paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Dr. Powell's surgical technique will be implemented across all Meridian facilities worldwide, Blackwood continued. It will transform cardiac care for hundreds of thousands of patients, and each of those facilities will include a training center where surgeons from developing countries will learn the technique free of charge, taking that knowledge back to communities that desperately need it. He let that sink in before delivering the final revelation. That's what was at stake here today, Richard. Not just a building contract, but a vision of what medicine can and should be. A vision that requires partners who understand that every human being deserves dignity and respect, not because of their wealth or status, but simply because they exist. Richard stood frozen for a moment, the full weight of what he had lost becoming clear. Without another word, he opened the door and left. In the silence that followed, Jasmine felt a complex mixture of emotions, regret for the pain that would inevitably ripple through the Daniels family, but also a profound sense that justice had been served in a way that transcended mere punishment. Dignity isn't a privilege, mister, Blackwood Jasmine said quietly. It's a right. Thank you for understanding that. No, Dr. Powell, Blackwood replied. Thank you for reminding us what's truly at stake in the choices we make. Sometimes the difficult moments are the most necessary ones. Captain Reynolds nodded in agreement. Standing firm against injustice rarely feels comfortable, but it's how systems begin to change. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to return to the conference, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a girl studying anatomy books by lamplight to a surgeon whose work would transform care around the world. From a passenger facing prejudice in first class to a catalyst for accountability in the business world. None of it had been planned or sought. She had simply refused to be diminished, refused to accept that her dignity was negotiable. And in doing so, she had set in motion consequences that reached far beyond that initial confrontation. Outside the conference room, Madison stood alone, her expression a mixture of anxiety and resignation. When she saw Jasmine, she approached hesitantly. My dad just left, she said quietly. He wouldn't talk to me or Mom. He just walked away. Is it true? Did Meridian cancel the contract? Jasmine nodded, compassion filling her for this young woman caught in the crossfire. Yes. I'm sorry if that causes difficulties for your family. Madison surprised her with a small, sad smile. Maybe it needed to happen. Maybe it's the only way they'll ever understand that how they treat people matters. In that moment, looking at Madison's clear-eyed assessment of her parents' failings and her own determination to chart a different course, Jasmine felt a surge of hope. Perhaps the most significant outcome of this entire saga wouldn't be the contract decision, or even the implementation of her surgical technique, but the awakening of conscience in one young woman who would carry that awareness forward into her own life and career. You're going to make an excellent doctor someday, Madison, she said softly. Madison's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. You really think so? I know so. Because you understand the most important principle in medicine. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. As they parted ways, Jasmine heading to the closing session and Madison to face the aftermath with her parents, that principle echoed in her mind. It was the thread that connected her surgical innovation to Captain Reynolds's decisive action on the flight to Alexander Blackwood's contract decision. Different contexts, different stakes, but the same fundamental truth. Dignity is non-negotiable. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their status or appearance, share this video now. The final chapter of this incredible story will show you just how powerfully one person standing firm can change the world around them. The closing session of the International Medical Innovation Conference was held in the main hall of the Royal Albert Hall, the space filled with medical professionals from around the world. Jasmine sat in the front row alongside Alexander Blackwood and the other featured presenters, listening as the conference chair delivered concluding remarks about the transformative research presented over the previous days. Before we officially closed this year's conference, the chair announced, Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Medical Technologies, has requested a few minutes to make a special announcement. Murmurs of interest rippled through the audience. Meridian's announcements were always significant for the medical community, often signaling major investments or technological breakthroughs. Blackwood approached the podium with his characteristic poised confidence. "Thank you." He began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "Over the past 3 days, we've witnessed extraordinary innovations that promise to transform patient care worldwide. None has impressed me more than the minimally invasive cardiac technique presented by Dr. Jasmine Powell." He gestured toward Jasmine, and a spotlight illuminated her briefly as applause filled the hall. "Today, I'm pleased to announce that Meridian Medical Technologies will be implementing Dr. Powell's technique across our entire global network of hospitals and research centers. Additionally, we are establishing the Powell Initiative for Equitable Cardiac Care, a $50 million program that will bring this life-saving innovation to underserved communities worldwide." The applause crescendoed, with many attendees rising to their feet. Jasmine sat stunned, having had no warning of this announcement. Dr. Powell Blackwood continued, once the applause subsided. "Would you join me on stage?" In a daze, Jasmine rose and made her way to the podium. As she ascended the steps, she caught sight of the Daniels family in the audience. Richard sat rigid with barely concealed fury. Veronica's face was twisted in resentment, and Madison was beaming with genuine admiration, clapping enthusiastically despite her parents' evident displeasure. Blackwood handed Jasmine the microphone. "Dr. Powell, would you share a few words about your vision for how this technique can transform cardiac care globally?" Jasmine hadn't prepared remarks, but as she looked out over the audience at colleagues who had embraced her research, at Madison's hopeful expression, at the Daniels family's contrasting reactions, she knew exactly what needed to be said. "Thank you, Alexander." She began, her voice steady and clear. "When I developed this technique, my goal wasn't recognition or accolades. It was to create a pathway to healing for patients who previously had no options. Patients who were told their conditions were too risky for traditional surgery. Patients who, for various reasons, had been deemed unworthy of the highest standard of care." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the audience. In medicine, as in life, we often face moments where we must decide whose dignity matters, whose pain deserves attention, whose lives are worth saving at any cost. The Powell Initiative represents a declaration that everyone deserves access to life-saving care, not because of their wealth status or privilege, but because of their inherent worth as human beings. The hall fell silent, hundreds of distinguished medical professionals hanging on her every word. This was no longer just about a surgical technique, it was about a fundamental vision of what healthcare could and should be. "Dignity isn't a privilege," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's a right. And when we stand firm in that belief, we create ripples that extend far beyond individual encounters. We reshape institutions, change policies, and ultimately transform lives." From the corner of her eye, she saw Veronica shift uncomfortably in her seat. Richard stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "I'm deeply honored by Meridian's commitment to bringing this technique to patients regardless of their circumstances," Jasmine continued. "And I'm grateful to everyone who helped make this moment possible, including those who challenged me to stand firm in my convictions when it would have been easier to step aside. Her gaze found Captain Reynolds in the audience, and she offered him a small smile of appreciation. In closing, I want to share something my father told me years ago. They might not always want to give you a seat at the table, but when you earn it, don't you dare let anyone take it from you. Today, I'm humbled to be able to extend that table to create more seats and to ensure that no one is turned away from the care they deserve. The applause that followed was thunderous, the audience rising in a unanimous standing ovation. Jasmine stood there momentarily overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, not just the professional recognition, but the profound sense that a cycle had been broken. That dignity denied on an airplane had been transformed into dignity affirmed on a global scale. As she returned to her seat, Alexander whispered, "Perfectly said." The conference chair returned to the podium to formally close the proceedings, but Jasmine's attention was drawn to movement in the audience. The Daniels family was leaving Richard practically dragging Veronica toward the exit, while Madison trailed behind, reluctantly casting a final glance toward the stage. When the closing remarks concluded, attendees began to disperse, many stopping to congratulate Jasmine and express interest in implementing her technique at their own institutions. She accepted their good wishes with grace, though her thoughts kept returning to Madison, to the hope she'd seen in the girl's eyes amidst her parents' anger. As the crowd thinned, Jasmine spotted Madison standing alone near the exit, clearly waiting for something or someone. When their eyes met, Madison approached hesitantly. "Dr. Powell." She began, her voice soft but determined. "I wanted to say goodbye before we leave. And to thank you." "Thank me?" Jasmine asked, surprised. "For what?" "For showing me that it's possible to succeed without compromising who you are." Madison glanced over her shoulder, ensuring her parents weren't nearby. "My mom and dad are not taking things well. The contract, your announcement, all of it. Dad's lawyer is already talking about challenging Meridian's decision." Jasmine sighed. "I'm sorry your family is going through this difficult time." "Don't be," Madison replied with unexpected firmness. "Maybe it's what they need, what we all need. A wake-up call." "And what about you?" Jasmine asked gently. "How are you processing all of this?" Madison straightened slightly, a new resolve evident in her posture. "I've made a decision. I'm applying to Johns Hopkins for pre-med next year. My parents don't know yet, but I'm not going to let them talk me out of it." Pride swelled in Jasmine's chest for this young woman's courage. "That's wonderful, Madison. It won't be easy, but I think you have what it takes." "I hope so." Madison admitted, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features. "Sometimes I worry that I'm too much like them, that I've absorbed their attitudes without realizing it." "The fact that you're asking that question suggests otherwise," Jasmine assured her. "Self-awareness is the first step toward change." Madison hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from her bag. Would you mind giving me your email in case I have questions about med school or if I just need advice from someone who isn't like your parents?" Jasmine finished gently. She took the notebook and wrote down her professional email address. "I'd be happy to stay in touch, Madison. And, for what it's worth, I think the medical profession will be better for having you in it." Madison's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. "Thank you. For everything." She glanced toward the exit again. "I should go. They're waiting in the car." As Madison turned to leave, Jasmine called after her. "Remember what I said about dignity being non-negotiable. That applies to you too." Madison nodded, a small smile touching her lips before she disappeared through the doors. Alexander approached as Jasmine watched Madison leave. "Making a difference already, I see." "She was already on the right path," Jasmine replied. "She just needed permission to stay on it. Sometimes that's the most important gift we can give," Alexander observed. "Permission to be who they truly are, rather than who others expect them to be." They walked together toward the reception area where the conference's final networking event was taking place. Captain Reynolds joined them, having waited for the crowd to thin. "That was quite an announcement, Alexander," he said. "The Powell Initiative will transform countless lives." "It was an easy decision once I saw the research," Alexander replied. "And after witnessing firsthand the character of the woman behind it." He turned to Jasmine. "Which reminds me, we have some details to discuss about your role in overseeing the initiative if you're interested." "My role?" Jasmine asked, surprised. "We'll need a medical director to ensure the program maintains the highest standards as it expands globally. Someone with both the technical expertise and the moral compass to guide it. I can't think of anyone better qualified." The offer was unexpected and momentous, a career-defining opportunity that would allow her to extend the reach of her work far beyond what she had imagined possible. "I would be honored," she said simply. "Excellent," Alexander replied with satisfaction. "We'll arrange a formal meeting next week to discuss the details. For now, enjoy the reception. You've earned this moment." As he moved away to greet other attendees, Captain Reynolds remained beside Jasmine. "Quite a journey from seat 3B to here," he observed with a smile. "Indeed," she agreed. "Though I never could have predicted where that journey would lead." "That's often the case with moments of principle," he replied. "We never know how far the ripples will extend when we simply do what's right." Jasmine thought of Madison, of the $50 million initiative bearing her name, of the countless patients who would benefit from her technique. All stemming from one moment when she had refused to surrender her dignity. "Thank you again for standing firm that day," she said to Captain Reynolds. "Your actions made more difference than you know." "As did yours," he replied. "We each play our part in breaking harmful patterns. The key is recognizing when those moments arrive and having the courage to act." As they joined the reception, Jasmine felt a profound sense of completion. The conflict that had begun on Flight 237 had resolved in ways none of them could have anticipated. Not with mere punishment or vindication, but with transformation of careers, of institutions, and most importantly, of lives. Her moment of power hadn't come from confrontation or revenge. It had come from standing firmly in her truth, from refusing to be diminished, and ultimately from using her position to extend dignity to others. That she realized was the most meaningful victory of all. Who else is feeling inspired by Dr. Powell's journey? This incredible story proves that when you stand firm in your dignity, you can change not just your own circumstances, but the world around you. Drop a comment with how this story has inspired you, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories. The executive boardroom at Meridian Medical Technologies' London office exuded quiet opulence. Mahogany paneling lined the walls, adorned with tasteful artwork depicting medical innovations throughout history. The massive conference table gleamed under recessed lighting, each place set with leather portfolios and crystal water glasses. Richard and Veronica Daniels sat rigidly on one side, their postures betraying the tension that had built over the past 24 hours. Across from them, Alexander Blackwood and James Wilson represented Meridian, their expressions professionally neutral. Jasmine had been invited to attend as the newly appointed director of the Powell Initiative, her presence symbolic of the values Meridian was choosing to prioritize. The meeting had been requested by Richard's attorneys, a final attempt to salvage the $200 million contract that had slipped through their fingers. Noticeably absent was Madison, who had reportedly refused to attend, creating yet another point of friction within the already strained family. "Thank you all for agreeing to this meeting." Richard began, his voice carefully modulated to project calm rationality. "I believe there's been a significant misunderstanding regarding Daniels Construction's values and our alignment with Meridian's mission." Alexander nodded politely, but remained silent, waiting for Richard to continue. "The incident on Flight 237 was unfortunate," Richard acknowledged, "but it represents a personal matter, not a reflection of our corporate culture or business practices. To allow it to derail a partnership that would benefit both our organizations seems disproportionate." Veronica sat beside him, uncharacteristically subdued. The events of the previous day, the public announcement of the Powell Initiative, the visible support Madison had shown for Jasmine, the whispers that had followed them through the conference had clearly affected her. Her usual imperious demeanor had been replaced by a brittle facade that threatened to crack at any moment. Richard Alexander replied evenly, "I appreciate your perspective. However, Meridian's decision wasn't made hastily or based on a single incident. It reflects our assessment of whether our organizations share the same fundamental values." Values? Richard repeated, a hint of frustration breaking through his professional veneer. "I've spent 30 years building a company that delivers excellence in every project. Our values are evident in the quality of our work. Excellence in construction is indeed one of your strengths," Alexander acknowledged. "But Meridian's definition of excellence encompasses more than technical capability. It includes how we treat people, all people, regardless of their background or circumstance. And you've determined that Daniel's Construction fails in this regard based on a personal disagreement between my wife and Dr. Powell." Richard's tone sharpened slightly. "Based on a pattern of behavior that suggests a fundamental misalignment with our principles," Alexander corrected gently. The tension in the room was electric. Everyone could feel that this was more than a business negotiation. It was a moment of reckoning about core values that would shape institutional relationships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Veronica stirred, breaking her silence. "This is absurd. You're canceling a $200 million contract because I questioned someone's seating assignment." Jasmine, who had remained silent, felt all eyes turn to her. She met Veronica's gaze calmly. "Mrs. Daniels, with respect, you didn't question my seating assignment. You demanded I give up my rightful place. When I declined, you attempted to bribe me, deliberately damaged my property, and made comments that questioned my belonging in first class based on appearances alone. And for this our family business suffers." Veronica's voice rose with indignation. "Do you have any idea what this contract meant to Daniel's Construction? The jobs at stake? The financial implications?" "We do," James Wilson interjected, "which is why we've developed an alternative proposal." This caught Richard's attention. "What kind of proposal?" Alexander slid a leather portfolio across the table. "Meridian is prepared to offer Daniel's Construction a modified contract with 3 key conditions." Richard opened the portfolio cautiously, scanning the document inside. First, Alexander continued, "Daniel's Construction will implement a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program throughout all levels of the organization with verifiable metrics and regular independent audits. Second, 10% of the contract value will be allocated to funding scholarships for minority students entering construction management and engineering fields. And third," his gaze shifted to Veronica, "Mrs. Daniels will step down from her unofficial but influential role in company operations and public relations." Veronica gasped. "How dare you? You have no right to dictate who can be involved in our family business." "We have every right to specify the conditions under which we're willing to partner," James replied matter-of-factly. "You're free to decline." Richard studied the document, his expression unreadable. "The contract value has been reduced by 20%. "Yes," Alexander confirmed. "The difference will be directed to the Powell Initiative, specifically toward bringing Dr. Powell's surgical technique to underserved communities." For 10 full seconds, no one spoke. The only sounds in the room were the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. It was as if everyone present was holding their breath, waiting to see how Richard would respond to this unprecedented ultimatum. "This feels punitive," Richard finally said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "It's corrective," Alexander countered. "An opportunity for meaningful change rather than mere consequences. And if we refuse these terms, then Meridian will proceed with our second-choice contractor, and Daniel's Construction will need to explain to its shareholders and employees why a $200 million contract was lost." The implication was clear. Such an explanation would inevitably involve the details of what had transpired on Flight 237 and at the conference, potentially causing far more damage to the company's reputation than accepting the modified contract. Richard closed the portfolio, his fingers drumming lightly on its surface as he considered his options. "I'll need to consult with our board and legal team." "Of course," Alexander agreed. "We're prepared to give you 48 hours to make your decision." Veronica's composure finally shattered. "This is blackmail. You're using our livelihood to force us to apologize for something that wasn't wrong in the first place." Richard placed a restraining hand on his wife's arm, but she shook it off angrily. "No, Richard, I won't sit here and be dictated to by people who have clearly orchestrated this entire situation." She turned to Jasmine, eyes blazing. "You planned this, didn't you? From the moment you refused to move seats. This was all a calculated move to advance your career at our expense." The accusation was so wildly disconnected from reality that Jasmine almost laughed. Instead, she maintained her composure, recognizing the desperate attempt to recast Veronica as the victim rather than the instigator. "Mrs. Daniels," she said quietly, "I had no idea who you were when I boarded that flight. I didn't know your husband's company was bidding on a Meridian contract. I certainly couldn't have predicted that Alexander would attend my presentation or offer to implement my technique globally. All I did was refuse to surrender my dignity when you demanded it." The room fell silent. Not a breath, not a rustle of papers, not a single sound penetrated the thick tension that had settled over them all. It was as if Jasmine's words had frozen time itself, forcing everyone present to confront an uncomfortable truth. "Exactly," Alexander added. "No one orchestrated anything. What's unfolded here is simply the natural consequence of choices freely made." Richard, sensing the situation spiraling further out of control, stood abruptly. "We've heard your proposal, Alexander. You'll have our answer within 48 hours. As he guided Veronica toward the door, she resisted momentarily, turning back to deliver a final venomous glare at Jasmine. "This isn't over. People like you always think you can change the rules, but some things are immutable. Some hierarchies exist for a reason. Your money buys buildings." Mrs. Daniels, Jasmine replied evenly. "But it can't buy you character." The calm precision of Jasmine's response seemed to catch Veronica off guard. She had clearly expected anger, defensiveness, or gloating, not quiet dignity. For a moment, confusion flickered across her features before Richard firmly led her from the room. When the door closed behind them, James Wilson exhaled slowly. "Well, that was about as pleasant as expected." "Do you think they'll accept the terms?" Jasmine asked. Alexander considered this. "Richard will, because he's a pragmatist who understands the financial and reputational stakes. Veronica will fight it, but ultimately her influence will wane if the board and shareholders are forced to choose between her pride and the company's survival." And Madison Jasmine couldn't help asking. Alexander's expression softened. "Madison emailed me this morning asking about Meridian's internship program for pre-med students. She mentioned you'd encouraged her to pursue medicine." Jasmine smiled, genuinely pleased by this development. "She has the compassion and integrity that make an excellent physician. Qualities not readily apparent in her parents," James observed dryly. "Perhaps not," Alexander agreed. "But that's the nature of progress, isn't it? Each generation has the opportunity to learn from the mistakes of the previous one and choose a different path." As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave the boardroom, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. What had begun as a simple flight to present her research had evolved into something far more significant, a moment of reckoning that would reshape multiple lives and institutions. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alexander asked as they walked toward the elevator. "I was just thinking about how a single moment of standing firm can ripple outward in ways we never anticipate." Jasmine replied. "On that plane, I wasn't trying to change the world or reshape a corporation's values. I was simply refusing to be diminished. And yet, Alexander observed that simple act of dignity may end up transforming more lives than your surgical technique, as remarkable as it is. How so? Because dignity is contagious, he explained. Madison witnessed yours and found the courage to claim her own. Captain Reynolds honored it and reinforced that everyone deserves the same respect. I recognized it and realized it needed to be reflected in Meridian's partnerships. He smiled. Even Richard and Veronica in their resistance are being forced to confront what it means to truly value human dignity. As they stepped into the elevator, Jasmine considered this perspective. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of what had transpired wouldn't be found in contracts or initiatives, but in the quiet affirmation that every person's dignity matters not because of their wealth status or privilege, but simply because they exist. That recognition, once experienced, could never be fully forgotten. And therein lay the seed of lasting change. If you believe in the power of standing your ground with dignity, give this video a thumbs up. The ripple effects of Jasmine's courage are about to transform lives in ways no one could have predicted. 6 months later, Jasmine stood at the podium in the newly completed atrium of Meridian's Research and Innovation Center. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the diverse crowd gathered for the facility's grand opening. Medical professionals from around the world mingled with construction workers, hospital administrators, and local community members, all united in celebration of what this center represented for the future of cardiac care. The journey to this moment had been filled with unexpected twists. Daniels Construction had ultimately accepted Meridian's modified contract, though not without significant internal conflict. Richard had prevailed against Veronica's vehement objections, recognizing that the alternative would be far more damaging to the company he had spent decades building. The required diversity and inclusion program was now in its early stages, with quarterly reports indicating modest but meaningful progress. The Scholarship Fund for Minority Students in Construction and Engineering had already awarded its first grants, creating opportunities for talented young people who might otherwise have been excluded from the industry. Most significantly, Veronica had been removed from her unofficial role in company operations, a condition she had fought bitterly until the board of directors made their preference clear: accept the change or risk everything. Today marks not just the opening of a building, Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly through the atrium, but the beginning of a new approach to cardiac care. Within these walls, surgeons will learn the minimally invasive techniques that can transform outcomes for patients previously considered too high risk for traditional procedures. She gestured to the state-of-the-art training facilities visible through glass walls on the upper levels. Every 6 weeks, a new cohort of surgeons from underserved regions will receive comprehensive training here free of charge. They'll return to their communities equipped to save lives that might otherwise have been lost. The audience applauded enthusiastically, many rising to their feet. Among them was Captain Reynolds, who had become a valued friend and occasional advisor to the Powell Initiative. Beside him stood Madison Daniels, now in her first semester at Johns Hopkins, her face alight with purpose and promise. Notably absent were Richard and Veronica. Though Richard had attended the contractually required inspections during construction, he had declined the invitation to the opening ceremony, whether from lingering resentment or simple recognition that his presence might detract from the celebration was unclear. This center stands as testament to what can be accomplished when we prioritize both technical excellence and human dignity, Jasmine continued. When we recognize that every life has equal value and deserves equal care regardless of circumstance. Her gaze found Alexander in the front row, nodding in approval. The Powell Initiative had expanded beyond even his ambitious vision, with implementation now underway in 27 countries, and preliminary data showing remarkable improvements in patient outcomes. "I want to acknowledge the many hands and hearts that made this possible," she said, gesturing to the construction workers seated in a designated section, including the skilled craftspeople of Daniels Construction, whose technical expertise created this beautiful facility. It was a gracious acknowledgement offered without rancor or resentment. The journey had never been about punishing the Daniels family, but about affirming a principle that transcended personal conflict. As the ceremony continued with ribbon cutting and tours of the facility, Jasmine found a moment to speak with Madison, who had flown in specifically for the event. "How's medical school treating you?" she asked warmly. Madison's eyes lit up. "It's challenging but amazing. I've joined a student group focused on healthcare equity issues, and we're developing outreach programs for underserved communities in Baltimore." "That's wonderful," Jasmine replied, genuinely pleased by the young woman's enthusiasm and focus. "My parents still aren't speaking to me," Madison admitted, a shadow crossing her features. "Dad calls occasionally to check if I've come to my senses yet, but Mom, she sees my choice as a betrayal. Of her, of the family, of everything they wanted for me." Jasmine squeezed her arm sympathetically. "I'm sorry it's been so difficult. Family estrangement is never easy, even when it's necessary for your own growth." "It's worth it," Madison said with quiet determination. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm becoming who I'm meant to be, not who they wanted me to be." She glanced around at the bustling atrium. "And seeing all this, what can happen when people choose to do what's right instead of what's expected? It confirms I made the right decision." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. To everyone's surprise, Veronica Daniels had arrived, dressed in an understated suit rather than her usual ostentatious attire, scanning the crowd with an uncertain expression. Madison's eyes widened. "Mom, what is she doing here?" Before Jasmine could respond, Alexander approached with a distinguished-looking gentleman in tow. "Jasmine Madison, I'd like you to meet Dr. Gabriel Santos, the new director of our international training program. He'll be overseeing the implementation of the Powell technique in our partner hospitals globally." Dr. Santos shook their hands warmly. "It's an honor to meet you both. Dr. Powell, your work is revolutionizing cardiac care in ways we've only dreamed of. And Madison Alexander tells me you're interested in our summer internship program for medical students." "Very interested," Madison confirmed eagerly, though her eyes kept darting toward her mother, who remained near the entrance, not yet approaching. "Wonderful. We could use bright minds like yours, especially those who understand that medicine is as much about compassion as it is about technical skill." As they chatted, Jasmine noticed that Veronica still hadn't moved further into the atrium. Excusing herself tactfully, she approached the woman who had once treated her with such contempt. "Mrs. Daniels, this is a surprise." Veronica startled slightly as if caught doing something illicit. "Dr. Powell," she acknowledged stiffly. "Are you here for the opening ceremony?" Jasmine asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm here to see my daughter, Veronica," replied her voice quieter than Jasmine had ever heard it. "Richard doesn't know. He wouldn't approve." The admission was unexpected, a small crack in the facade of family unity the Daniels had always projected. "Madison will be glad to see you," I think Jasmine offered. "She's missed you despite everything." Veronica's gaze remained fixed on her daughter, who was animatedly discussing something with Dr. Santos. "She looks happy, different. She's finding her path," Jasmine observed. "It takes courage to chart your own course, especially when it diverges from family expectations." Veronica's expression tightened. "Is that what you think she's doing? Rebelling against our expectations?" "I think she's discovering who she truly is," Jasmine corrected gently, "which may or may not align with who you imagined she would be." Veronica fell silent for a moment, watching as Madison laughed at something Alexander said, her face alight with intellectual engagement and purpose. "I never saw her like this at Richard's business functions," she admitted quietly. "She always seemed contained. Careful. People flourish when they're pursuing their authentic interests," Jasmine suggested, "when they're valued for who they are rather than who others want them to be." Veronica turned to her, then really looking at her perhaps for the first time. "You think I don't value my daughter? I think you value what you believe is best for her," Jasmine replied carefully. which may not be the same as valuing what she believes is best for herself. The distinction seemed to strike something in Veronica. She glanced back at Madison, who had not yet noticed her presence. "I should go," she said abruptly. This was a mistake. Or, Jasmine countered gently, it could be an opportunity. To listen to her, to try to understand why this path calls to her. Veronica hesitated, vulnerability briefly visible beneath her carefully constructed exterior. She might not want to speak with me, after everything that's happened. There's only one way to find out, Jasmine pointed out. And regardless of how it goes, you'll have shown her that she matters enough for you to try. After another moment's hesitation, Veronica squared her shoulders and moved toward her daughter. Madison looked up, surprise and then cautious hope crossing her features as she recognized her mother. Jasmine stepped away, giving them privacy for their reunion. Whether it would lead to reconciliation or further estrangement remained to be seen, but the attempt itself represented growth, a willingness to step beyond rigid expectations and entrenched positions. Alexander joined her by the windows overlooking the surgical training center. "Was that Veronica Daniels I just saw?" "Yes," Jasmine confirmed. She came to see Madison. "Interesting," he mused. "Perhaps there's hope yet." "There's always hope for growth," Jasmine replied. "Sometimes it just takes longer than we might wish." They stood in companionable silence, watching as the facility hummed with activity, medical professionals exploring the advanced equipment, construction workers proudly pointing out features they had helped create, community representatives discussing outreach programs that would bring these innovations to those who needed them most. "You know," Alexander said thoughtfully, "when I first heard about the incident on Flight 237, I never imagined it would lead to all this." He gestured to encompass not just the building, but the people within it and the work they would do. "It's remarkable how a single moment of standing firm against injustice can catalyze so much positive change." Jasmine nodded, thinking of Captain Reynolds's decision to uphold dignity over status, of her own refusal to surrender her rightfully earned seat, of Madison's courage in pursuing her authentic path despite her parents' disapproval. "That's how transformation happens," she observed. "Not all at once, but in moments of choice that ripple outward in ways we can never fully anticipate." As the celebration continued around them, those ripples were visible everywhere in the diverse faces of the medical professionals who would train here in the innovative techniques that would save countless lives, in the tentative conversation between mother and daughter across the atrium. Not every seed of change would blossom immediately. Not every wound would heal completely. But the direction had been set, the possibilities expanded. And in that expansion lay the true resolution of what had begun on Flight 237, not merely justice for a single incident of discrimination, but a sustained commitment to creating a world where dignity was truly non-negotiable for everyone. If this story has touched you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of dignity, courage, and transformation. 1 year after the opening of Meridian's Research and Innovation Center, Jasmine stood on the stage of the International Cardiac Care Symposium in Geneva, presenting the first comprehensive data from the Powell Initiative. The numbers told a compelling story: a 72% reduction in mortality rates for high-risk cardiac patients, a 68% decrease in recovery time, and implementation in 103 hospitals across 42 countries. But statistics alone don't capture the full impact, she told the rapt audience. Behind each number is a human life, a parent who lived to see their child graduate, a grandparent who met their grandchild, a spouse who celebrated another anniversary. As she concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, she spotted a familiar face in the third row, Madison Daniels, now halfway through her pre-med program and thriving. Beside her, somewhat surprisingly, sat Veronica Daniels, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. The past year had brought unexpected developments. Richard and Veronica had separated their marriage, apparently unable to withstand the strains of the contract controversy and Madison's independent choices. Richard had thrown himself into implementing the required diversity and inclusion initiatives at Daniels Construction, approaching the task with the same methodical determination he brought to all business challenges. More surprisingly, Veronica had undergone her own transformation. After initially doubling down on her resentment, she had experienced what she later described as a moment of clarity while watching Madison flourish in medical school. She had begun therapy, joined a personal development program, and slowly, painfully started examining the attitudes and assumptions that had shaped her interactions with the world. The reconciliation between mother and daughter was tentative and ongoing, marked by setbacks as well as progress. But their presence together at the symposium suggested healing was possible even after deep wounds. After fielding questions from her colleagues, Jasmine made her way through the crowd to greet them. "Madison, I'm so glad you could make it," she said warmly, embracing the young woman. "Your research proposal on cardiac care accessibility in rural communities is impressive." Madison beamed. "Thank you for reviewing it. I'm hoping to expand on it for my senior thesis next year." Jasmine turned to Veronica, extending her hand. "Mrs. Daniels, it's good to see you." Veronica accepted the handshake with unexpected grace. "Dr. Powell, congratulations on your presentation. The results are remarkable." The acknowledgement, though simply phrased, represented a significant shift from their previous interactions. There was no sarcasm, no underlying hostility, just a straightforward recognition of achievement. "Thank you," Jasmine replied. "How are you finding the symposium?" "Enlightening," Veronica admitted. "Madison has been explaining the different presentations to me. I don't understand all the medical terminology, but I'm beginning to appreciate the impact of the work." Madison's expression as she watched her mother was a mixture of cautious hope and pride. "Mom's been attending therapy twice a week," she shared with Veronica's nodding permission, "and she started volunteering at a community health clinic in Greenwich." "It's not much," Veronica said quickly. "Just a few hours helping with administrative tasks. But it's educational. The people who come to the clinic, they're so different from my usual social circle. Different but no less valuable," Jasmine observed. "Yes," Veronica agreed quietly. "I'm beginning to understand that." She hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology, Dr. Powell. My behavior on that flight and afterward, it was inexcusable." The apology, though simply stated, was clearly difficult for a woman who had spent decades believing herself entitled to deference rather than accountable for her actions. "Thank you," Jasmine said sincerely. "That means a great deal." "I'm not looking for absolution," Veronica clarified. "Just acknowledging the truth. My therapist says that's an important step." "It is," Jasmine agreed. "For what it's worth, I think what you're doing now, supporting Madison, volunteering, examining your perspectives, those actions speak louder than any apology." They were joined by Captain Reynolds, who had continued his involvement with the Powell Initiative as an advisory board member while still flying for the airline. Dr. Powell Madison. He greeted them warmly, then paused as he recognized Veronica. "Mrs. Daniels." An awkward moment ensued as Veronica clearly struggled with how to respond to the man who had enforced the consequences for her behavior on Flight 237. "Captain Reynolds," she finally said, her voice steady. "I believe I owe you an apology as well. My conduct on your aircraft was inappropriate. You were simply doing your job, upholding the standards all passengers should respect." The captain accepted this with a dignified nod. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Daniels, and I'm glad to see you here supporting your daughter's interest in medicine." "She's quite determined," Veronica replied with what almost sounded like pride. "Apparently standing firm for what you believe in runs in the family, though the applications have differed somewhat." It was as close to self-awareness as they had ever heard from her, and Madison's smile in response was worth more than any elaborate declaration. As the symposium continued, These unlikely allies found themselves in conversation about the future of the Powell Initiative. Madison shared her ideas for expanding access to rural communities. Captain Reynolds discussed logistical challenges in transporting equipment to remote areas. And Veronica, somewhat hesitantly at first, offered insights about philanthropic partnerships that might help fund such expansions. The Daniels Foundation has connections with several healthcare-focused philanthropists, she explained. They might be interested in supporting the rural outreach program Madison is proposing. The offer represented more than practical assistance. It was an acknowledgement that resources long directed toward maintaining status and exclusivity could be redirected toward inclusion and accessibility. Later, as Jasmine prepared for the closing panel discussion, Alexander Blackwood joined her backstage. "I just had an interesting conversation with Veronica Daniels," he told her, his expression bemused. "She's proposed a joint initiative between the Daniels Foundation and Meridian to fund a training center for cardiac care specialists serving underprivileged communities." "That's unexpected," Jasmine admitted, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. People were capable of remarkable growth when they opened themselves to the possibility of change. "Indeed," Alexander agreed. She mentioned that watching her daughter's passion for medicine has given her a new perspective on what constitutes meaningful legacy. As Jasmine took the stage for the final panel, she found herself reflecting on the strange, winding journey that had brought them all to this point. What had begun as a confrontation over an airplane seat had catalyzed transformations none of them could have anticipated in their careers, in their perspectives, in the very structure of institutions and relationships that had once seemed immutable. The true resolution wasn't found in victory or defeat, in punishment or vindication. It was found in the ongoing work of creating a world where dignity was truly non-negotiable, not just for some, but for all. That work would never be complete. There would always be more hearts to heal more minds, to open more systems to reform. But each step forward created possibility for the next. Each affirmation of human dignity expanded the circle of what could be imagined and achieved. As Jasmine shared her vision for the future of cardiac care with her colleagues from around the world, she knew that the most powerful legacy of Flight 237 wasn't the Powell Initiative, impressive as it was. It was the simple, profound recognition that had rippled outward from that moment of standing firm. Every person deserves to occupy their rightful place in the world, not because of their wealth or status or privilege, but because of their inherent worth as a human being. That recognition, once experienced, could never be fully forgotten. And in a world where money and status often dictate who matters, Dr. Jasmine Powell's quiet dignity had just rewritten the rules. What began as one woman's refusal to surrender her dignity on Flight 237 transformed into a powerful catalyst for change that extended far beyond a simple seating dispute. Dr. Jasmine Powell's quiet strength in the face of prejudice not only revolutionized cardiac care worldwide, but inspired others to recognize their own worth and stand firm in their convictions. The ripple effects touched everyone involved, Captain Reynolds upholding the principle that every passenger's dignity is non-negotiable. Madison Daniels finding courage to pursue her authentic path in medicine, and even Veronica Daniels beginning the difficult journey toward self-awareness and growth. This story reminds us that true power lies not in status or privilege, but in the quiet conviction that respect and dignity belong to everyone. When we refuse to be diminished, we create space for something greater than ourselves to emerge. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Have you ever experienced a moment where standing firm changed more than you anticipated? Comment below with your own story of dignity and courage. Let's continue spreading this powerful message together. Remember, your dignity is never negotiable, and by standing firm in that truth, you might just change the world around you.
Тебе твою машину никто не купит.
И на мой Боинг много пассажиров. Тут потеряем твое тело.
Дожива, дожива.
Тогда скажи нам, кто тут наживо?
Кто тут наживо, а? А ты пойди купи. Вау, ну
Новый арифметик. Видел, бля, многих президенты метили.
Нету, бля, как. Да, где она? О, немский движение, что не знал? Бля, сейчас она приедет, начнут эти, блядь. Где она писать, блядь, тоже, блядь, нервничать буду. Говорит, завтра Анар приедет, завтра ЗП будет. Где Анар?
Нет, завтра будет кричать Лапшан.
Равш Гог раз на раз с бетоном в ринге. Бля, с кайфом.
Реально?
Бля, буду.
Побил бы его, нет, с кайфом?
Кайф, так с кайфом.
Пиздец, вы друзья.
За все время.
Как бы залетел, бля,
всё время
именно
как
понял,
мозги
в атмосферу тебя подкинул бы. Расщепил бы тебя, знаешь, бля, на атомы тебя.
Аля, что ты тут хочешь?
Атма у меня двигательный все. Штители дровые.
Кулачки, нет? Кулачки.
Кулиса.
На ММА свои сиськи скинешь.
Кулачки. Сэм, ты сбег где взял?
Музыку тоже заеб.
Нахуй мне ты забрал, я нервничаю. Спасибо. Конструкция, да, вот они пахнут, да? Так Макс багажником если не достал. Ты, долбоеб ебаный. Мне куда его достать? На твою голову положить его? Джон, где да?
Это драм побить
Раб, я нашел, твой босс сел на него. Опа! Сейчас я твою жопу выебу, подожди, приеду. Подожди, я сейчас буду в твоей натуре. Нахуй ты все даже. Шоу пластик. Шоу.
Дешевый.
Шоу пластик.
О, Алас, а можешь первый в мире на M5 G90 задний телевизор поставить?
Долбоеб, они уже есть телевизор.
Реально? Охуеть. Я не видел ничего.
Бля, я 9-9.
О, стой. Ну, отдай газ. На пустом парке. Сейчас на меня понервничал или просто нос почесал?
Резко вспомнил, что Адама Каен, блядь, стоит место парковочное, занимает, его рот ебал тоже эту машину. Сожгу ее нахуй, блядь.
Дайте в
Сука, я не вытерплю, куплю эту машину, сожгу нахуй, скажу, убери нахуй.
Купи.
Бля, блядь, сука, блядь.
Там сейчас цена хорошая, как раз у него. Он же в этом стоит. Рената на парковке.
Да. Да я хочу поставить и Эмку, и Порш туда, блядь, не могу,
Ты тоже
блядь.
охуеваешь.
Чё? Ну, блядь, ну Каен, ну какая разница, где Каены стоять, ну, блядь.
Ну ты так скажешь, какая разница, где М стоит.
Вася, у человека 10 домов. Пусть он отвезет свой, блядь, Каен
Да.
сюда.
А, сказали, то
На эвакуаторе можно.
и почву поднял.
Ну, а вот на эвакуатор.
Я готов тебе эвакуатор оплатить.
Давай, меня плачу.
Иди нахуй.
Нам на кольцо, да, это да, должны еще раз послушать.
Там где-то
Хочу весту.
в underground.
Хочу весту.
А там деловой день сосет на коленах стоит, и его Е60 тоже стоит дымит. Он думает, что у него пиздец машина, но он забыл, что он сосал. Он не мужчина.
О, смотри, Порш. Порш был, он показывал. Порш был. Хорошо.
Долбоёб, блядь,
Можно еще раз
Можно
ставить?
посильнее этого
дебил, блядь. Си какой, блядь.
Видите, да, и это меня возбуждает. Кто там? Может,
Видишь, хотя бы улыбнулся.
Я думал, мне показалось, понял?
Видишь, хотя бы улыбнулся. Я психолог тебя просто, в этом методе нерациональный.
Нет, я на тебя на 10 лет старше. Нахуй ты спорт твои. Когда ты ее сделаешь?
Через месяц, да?
Ну да. Ну вот опять интернет пропал. О, появился.
Да. Где показать?
Один кофе в Хлопковой не пьем.
Нихуя, я только сейчас понял.
А это этот сказал. Директор АвтоВАЗа говорит, я в Хлопковую, как он там, кофейню, да? А, я поехал в Хлопковую кофе дам.
Я купил вес, сука, чего вы мне мозги ебете? О, налево. И направо потом, сразу же. Сзади она. Сейчас надо осмотр сделать, машину не поцарапали мне.
Я вот директор.
Вот он стоит, одинокий волчара мой.
Иди круговая впадает.
Бля, какая она красивая. Брат, я в ахуе сам, какая она. Круговой обзор, пацан, 360 делаем, блядь. Так, смотрим. Смотрим. Ага, здесь нету, сзади. Так, сзади не может быть. Так, вот тут есть. Так, смотрим. Оп. Опа! Что это такое, бля? Говно какое-то. Так, осуждаю.
Где М3 стоит?
Так. А?
М3 где стоит?
М3 там, где вы мотоцикл покупали. Какой тотал, чего пишешь? Нормально.
Заводи свой чекмет, блядь.
Рот закрыли свой,
Да я
блядь.
в рот открыл, бля, на пятый.
Давай. Сука, бля, пойди выебу этой блядь сейчас. Литвин.
А, едем сюда.
Поехали нахуй, поехали.
Поехали, блядь.
Че ты на какой ты резине будешь заезжать? На этой?
На этой,
Не
блядь.
охуел ты, блядь?
Почему?
Поехали, блядь, чё?
Поехали.
Встань, хотите?
Да я выебу нахуй.
Встань, на этой резине.
Бля, брат, ты не бой.
На этой резине.
Да, если, ты понимаешь, если я тебе вот на этой машине погоню, тебе можно будет никогда не ездить за рулем.
Брат,
Давайте,
это
едем.
то, что я с тобой заезжаю, это уже унижение, блядь. Я просто по-братски делаю.
Давайте, езжайте.
Я знаю, что он уедет, блядь. Что мне это рассказываете, Бастин?
Кто уедет?
Вот это?
Порш едет.
Конечно, блядь.
Давай 100-200 станем.
Не, шма, я так не гоняю, у меня дома ребята.
Давай.
Давай. Нет, с тобой не буду оставить.
Брат, я на М2 могу выскочить.
На самом деле хайп гонка будет.
Не, М2 не потянет.
Хайп будет.
Ее не потянет? Брат, 700 сил там.
А, слышь, 2 у тебя, иди тоже нахуй, блядь.
А, они же
Может,
не
ты с
знают,
кем
они
вообще
не
гоняться,
видели.
может, они с Вестой со своей?
Ты чё вообще лезешь, блядь?
Я тебя в этом дизельном этом...
А ты чё
генераторе
стоишь, блядь,
сделаю.
вообще? Охуел, что ли?
Разбег, где мой ара?
Я тебя даже на генераторе на
Слышь,
дизельном
давай
гоню.
вместо Джентани поставим выхлоп сюда.
Он стоит как Веста.
Да.
Приору, блядь.
Не, на
Гранту
самом-
продашь?
не, как гранты.
где мой ара?
Бля, если вот так представить, брат, мы вот туда едем, стоим воздух гоняем, потом в другое место едем, стоим воздух гоняем.
Ну, это, ну,
Вот сюда едем,
брат.
понял? И то машину поставил, прогрел,
Кофейни
воздух погонял.
Да, поехали в кофейню хотя бы.
М3 надо
Там
забрать.
именно ветер задует.
Поехали, я тебя отвезу туда. Мы вдвоем поедем на машине. А обратно один как я поеду? Бля, мы все вместе поедем?
Нет, вы можете с Сэмом поехать, а
Сэм, поехали в кофейню, они поедут за М3 и к нам приедут в кофейню. Давай?
Когда приедет?
Мы поехали на кофейню, Катанкар.
хлопковый кофе дать?
О, Ренат! Сура, воздух.
Ну езжайте, блин.
Поехали, Сэм, выбрасывай. Нормальная машина, тебя как подсечь. Вот так вот. Идите нахуй, умоляю, я вас не знаю, бля. Бля, Сэм, нормальная машина, сядешь наконец-то. бля.
Машины на машину садишься, едешь, блядь. Хватит, ну уже, брат. Займитесь делом, блядь. Машины купили. Что машины, блядь, купили? Катаются туда-сюда, блядь.
От
Сэму руль,
От
Сэму руль.
Гондона до батона все есть.
Это чей телефон подключен здесь? Он что, а у вас хун что, бля, охуел? Какого хуя он на моей машине подключен, блядь? Братан.